Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Muse Fanfiction. In today's episode, we explore, what if Azula was reborn as Harry's twin sister and together they burned the entire Wizengamot to the ground? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The girl who remembered. The first thing Azula remembered was dying. Not the lightning. Not Katara's healing water pulling her back from the edge of it, not the cold stone of the asylum floor, not the last coherent thought she'd managed before the darkness swallowed her whole. Just the dying itself, the moment when everything that she was, everything she'd spent 16 years sharpening into a weapon, simply stopped mattering. The Fire Nation. The throne. Her father's approval. All of it, weightless and irrelevant, like ash floating up from a fire that had already gone cold. She remembered thinking, in that last moment, is that all? And then she was screaming in someone's arms and the world was bright and loud and cold, and she had lungs the size of fists and no control over any of her limbs, and it took her approximately 45 seconds to understand what had happened and another 30 to decide that if the universe thought she was going to accept this gracefully, the universe had never met her. She was a baby. She was, humiliatingly, unavoidably, a baby. The woman holding her had red hair and was crying and laughing at the same time, which Azula found chaotic and unsophisticated but filed away as data. She is happy, she is relieved, she is soft. The man beside her had glasses and messy black hair and was looking at Azula with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy that she didn't have a category for. There was another baby, already bundled and quiet, watching the chaos of his sister's arrival with green eyes that were somehow, already, entirely too perceptive. Azula stopped screaming. She looked at the green eyes. The green eyes looked back. She felt something she hadn't felt since she was very small, before her father started looking at her like a tool and her mother started looking at her like a question she didn't know the answer to. She felt recognized. Fine, she thought, in whatever part of her infant brain still had room for coherent thought. Fine. We'll see how this goes. It went poorly, for a while, in the way that being a baby always goes poorly when you have the memories and ambitions of a 16-year-old military prodigy. She couldn't speak. She couldn't walk. She was at the complete mercy of people she didn't know for every single basic need, which was an experience so antithetical to everything she was that she spent the first 3 months in a constant state of cold, quiet fury. But she watched. That she could do. She had always been good at watching. The woman, Lily, her name was Lily, and she smelled like something warm that Azula didn't have a word for yet, was brilliant. Azula clocked it early, the way Lily's eyes moved when she read, the quickness of her hands, the fact that she seemed to arrive at conclusions 3 steps ahead of everyone around her. She was kind in a way that wasn't weakness. She was the most competent person in any room she entered and she wore it lightly, which Azula found both baffling and admirable. The man, James, was funny and careless and brave in a way that looked effortless but wasn't. He loved his children with a totality that Azula's previous father had never managed, and she understood within the first year that whatever warmth she'd been reaching for her entire last life, this was it. She hated that it made her feel something. She stored the feeling away and didn't examine it. Harry she didn't need to study. Harry she simply knew, the way she'd known the flight path of an ember from the moment she first bent fire. He cried when he was tired and laughed when he was scared and reached for her hand across the crib gap with the blind, absolute confidence of someone who has never once considered that the hand might not be there. She always let him find it. She learned to walk at 9 months, which made Lily cry again and James actually fall off a chair. She learned to talk at 11 months, stringing together full sentences while Harry was still working on syllables, and if her first full sentence was, "That's wrong," directed at James's attempt to fix a leaky tap, well, nobody could say she wasn't consistent. She was learning magic in the way that children learn language, by proximity, by feel, by noticing the shape of it in the air around her. This world's magic and the bending of her last life were not the same thing, but they rhymed. They were both about will. They were both about knowing, completely and without doubt, that the thing you wanted to happen would happen. The mechanism was different. The principle was identical. She practiced at night, when Harry was asleep, lifting small objects and setting them back down, feeling the edges of what she could do. She was methodical about it. She kept notes in her head. She did not, under any circumstances, let on how much she already understood, because she had learned in her last life that people who underestimate you hand you the knife themselves. They were 15 months old when Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow. Azula was awake. She was always awake. She heard the door go downstairs. She heard James's voice, sharp, cutting off mid-sentence. She heard the thing that followed, which she knew immediately was a curse the way she'd once known immediately when an opponent had found their footing in a fight. She was on her feet in the crib before the sound finished, and she grabbed Harry's arm and shook him awake with the firm efficiency of someone who doesn't have time to be gentle about it. Harry blinked at her. "Za," he said, which was what he called her because Azalea was too many syllables for a 15-month-old. "Get up," she said. "Stay behind me." He got up. He always got up when she said to. The door opened and the man who walked in was tall and terrible in the way that only people who have given up on being human can manage. His eyes were red. His face was wrong. He looked at them both and Azula looked back, and for a moment that stretched out thin and quiet, neither of them moved. She felt fear. She acknowledged it, the way she'd been taught to, her father's training, cutting through the fog of a 15-month-old body, and then she set it aside because fear was information, not instruction. "Interesting," the man said, and his voice was like a door closing in a room with no windows. She felt the magic in the room spike and pulled it, instinctively, the way she'd once pulled fire from the air around her. She pulled it toward herself, built it up in her chest, and when the green light came for Harry she was already between them. She didn't know what she did. She would never be entirely sure. She was 15 months old and working with tools she barely understood. But the green light hit something she'd built in the space between them and shattered, not fizzled, not deflected, shattered, like glass, like a mirror struck from behind, and the fragments went back the way they came. The man who called himself Lord Voldemort had not been prepared for that. The house came down. The magic that had been holding everything together tore itself apart. Azula grabbed Harry and pulled him under the crib frame and held on while the ceiling rearranged itself violently above them, and through all of it Harry had his face pressed against her shoulder and was not making a sound. Later, much later, she would learn that people called Harry the boy who lived and wrote books about him and built a mythology around a 15-month-old baby who survived the killing curse. She would let them. It was fine. She had no interest in credit. She had interest in results. What she knew, sitting in the wreckage of a house that had been warm once, holding her brother with both arms while someone outside shouted and something roared overhead, was this: the world had just tried to take him from her. It had failed. It would not get a second attempt. The large man with the motorcycle deposited them at a house in Surrey that Azula assessed in under a minute and found comprehensively inadequate. The man who opened the door was wide and red-faced and had eyes like a suspicious pig. The woman beside him was thin and sharp and looked at the twins on her doorstep the way most people looked at something they'd found on the bottom of their shoe. The boy holding the woman's hand was already fat in the specific way of children who have been given everything they've ever cried for. There was a letter. The woman read it and her face went the color of old cheese. Azula watched all of this from the bundle of blankets she'd been deposited in and made her assessments. The large man, Vernon, was a bully. She knew the species intimately. He was the kind of man who was loudest in rooms where no one would argue back. His cruelty wasn't intelligent, it was reflexive, like a dog that bites because biting is the only thing it knows. The thin woman, Petunia, was more complicated. There was something behind her eyes that wasn't entirely unkind, buried under years of resentment like coal under rock. It was probably not worth excavating. The boy, Dudley, was a blank page that Vernon was already enthusiastically writing all over with a very bad pen. They were brought inside. Given a cupboard. The cupboard under the stairs, which was dusty and dark and smelled like old rubber and forgotten things. Harry reached out and patted her hand in the dark, which was, she thought, very Harry of him. "It'll be okay," he said, because he was 2 years old and already constitutionally incapable of giving up on anything. "Yes," she said. "It will." She meant it differently than he did. By the time they were 4, Azula had established several important facts about life at number 4, Privet Drive. Vernon was afraid of things he couldn't explain and compensated by controlling everything he could. Petunia ran the house like a general running a campaign, with meticulous attention to appearances and a secondary concern for anything that happened inside walls no one else could see. Dudley was being raised to believe that his comfort was the natural center of the universe and would pay for this lesson when the universe inevitably disagreed. The twins were given chores at 3, which Azula did without complaint because she was choosing her battles and mop floors was not a battle she cared about. She cooked breakfast on a step stool by 4, standing next to Harry, and the eggs were always perfect because she'd cracked an egg at 15 months and retained the muscle memory across 2 lives and 3 years. She had also, very quietly, made sure that Vernon was afraid of her. Not dramatically. Not in a way he could point to or report to someone. Just, a look, held slightly too long. A way of going still when he raised his voice that made him trail off mid-sentence, because something in the back of his animal brain was registering something it couldn't name. Small things. Strategic things. She was 4 years old and she was better at this than she had any right to be. The first time Vernon had grabbed Harry's arm, too hard, the way adults sometimes grab children when they've run out of patience and substitute force for explanation, Azula had been across the kitchen in a single step and placed herself between them. She'd looked up at Vernon Dursley, who was 6 feet tall and 15 stone and 40 years old, and she had said, very quietly, very clearly, "Don't." Vernon had looked down at her. Something in her face made him let go. He'd blustered afterward. Made a noise about discipline and ungrateful children and being allowed to run his own house. But he'd let go. And after that, he always let go. He found other ways to make Harry's life small, fewer seconds at dinner, a worse blanket, the knowledge that no matter how good he was it would never be good enough, but he kept his hands to himself, and Azula accepted this as the compromise it was. Harry had watched all of this with those green eyes that saw everything. "Zah," he said that night, tucked into their cupboard. "How did you do that?" "Do what?" "Make him stop." He was really angry and then he just stopped. Azula considered this. She could tell him it was a trick. She could tell him she was scary. She could give him the tactical analysis, which was that Vernon Dursley was a man whose cruelty required an audience that was properly afraid of him, and she had simply declined to be properly afraid. "I looked at him like I knew something he didn't," she said instead. "People don't like that. Especially people like him." Harry thought about this for a moment, turning it over in his hands like an interesting stone. "What did you know that he didn't?" "That he needed me to be scared. And that I wasn't." Another pause. "I'm scared of him sometimes." "I know." She pulled the blanket up around his ears. "That's fine. I'm here. You're not scared of anything." She didn't answer that. There was exactly one thing she was scared of in this world, and it was the green eyes going dim, the hand going cold, the second time losing everything because she hadn't been fast enough or clever enough or present enough. She would not tell him that, because Harry would feel guilty for being the thing she was afraid to lose, and guilt made him reckless. She just said, "Go to sleep." He did. The magic started showing up more insistently when they were 5. For Harry it was accidental, involuntary. It happened when he was upset or surprised, sudden and uncontrolled bursts that turned his teacher's hair blue or landed him on the school roof when he was fleeing from Dudley and his friends. Each incident left him wide-eyed and shaky afterward, this thing inside him that he couldn't grab hold of, that responded to his emotions like a too loud echo in a quiet room. For Azula it was something else entirely. She was doing it on purpose. She started small, lighting a candle with a look, the way she'd once lit a candle with a breath. Moving a pencil across the table toward her while her hands were folded in her lap. Once, memorably, when Dudley stole Harry's lunch and Azula was across the schoolyard and couldn't get there in time, she'd pulled it back toward Harry from 20 feet away with a focused, furious precision that snapped it right out of Dudley's hand. Dudley had stood in the schoolyard staring at his empty fist like he was questioning everything he believed about physics. Harry had looked at his returned lunch. Looked at her. Looked back at the lunch. "You did that," he said. Dudley dropped it. "Zah. He's very clumsy," she said serenely, and sat down and opened her book. But in the evenings, in the cupboard, she was honest with him. She told him what she could do, showed him the smallest version of it, a marble rolling in a slow circle on the floor between them, guided by nothing visible. His face lit up the way it always did when she showed him something real, this uncomplicated delight that she had never managed to produce in herself but could apparently still produce in him. "We're magic," he said, like it was the most wonderful thing he'd ever said, and she supposed for him it was. "Yes," she said. "We are. Is that why we live in the cupboard? We live in the cupboard because our aunt and uncle are afraid of what they don't understand and compensate with cruelty. It's a very common failing." Harry stared at her. "You're 5. Your point." He laughed. He had a good laugh, not polished or controlled, just completely genuine, a sound that had no particular strategy behind it. She had catalogued it as one of the things she would not allow the world to take from him, and she returned to this catalogue whenever she needed reminding what she was doing and why. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We learn everything we can. We get strong. We wait." "Wait for what?" "For someone to come and tell us what we are." "They will. This kind of thing always has people attached to it." She'd pieced together enough, from Petunia's flinching and the letter and the scar on Harry's forehead, to know that they were connected to something larger than a cupboard in Surrey. Something had found them worth targeting, once. Something would find them worth claiming, eventually. "When they do, we'll be ready." Harry considered this with his characteristic seriousness. "Ready how?" She smiled, and it was sharp and bright and entirely her own. "Practice more." They were 6 when Harry accidentally shattered every window on the ground floor during an argument with Vernon. They were 7 when Azula sat in the school library and read every book they had on chemistry and history and philosophy and found them all somewhat thin but useful. They were 8 when she won a regional chess tournament while Harry watched from the audience and cheered so loudly the tournament marshal asked him to quiet down, and when she came back to the table with the trophy Harry hugged her with both arms and said, "I knew you would," and she stood very still and didn't pull away. They were 9 when Vernon tried, drunk and stupid, to take a belt to Harry for breaking a window, not magic this time, just a regular accident, a football through a pane of glass, and Azula stepped into the hallway from the kitchen with a knife she'd been using to peel potatoes and said, pleasantly, "I would think very carefully about that." She wouldn't have used the knife. She was 9. But Vernon didn't know that, and more importantly, her eyes said something different from her voice, something that Vernon's deep animal brain translated accurately as "I am not what you think I am, and you are making a serious mistake." He put the belt down. He left the house. He came back 2 hours later smelling like a pub and didn't look at either of them for 3 days. Petunia found Azula in the kitchen afterward, still holding the potato knife, and looked at her for a long moment. "You're like her," Petunia said finally. "Like your mother." Azula set the knife down on the cutting board. "In what way?" She was never afraid of him either. Petunia's voice was complicated, tight and flat and full of things behind it. "She was never afraid of anything, Lily. I used to think she was just brave. Later I thought she was just reckless." A pause. "Now I don't know what I think." "She was both," Azula said. "Probably. The best people usually are." Petunia made a noise that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob and left the kitchen. She was slightly less cold to them both after that. Not warm. Not apologetic. But something had shifted, some calculation had been run and revised, and the cruelties became smaller, less pointed. Azula logged it under acceptable progress and moved on. The summer before their 11th birthday, the letters started arriving. The first one came on a Tuesday, addressed to Miss A. Potter and Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, in green ink on yellowed parchment. Azula picked it up before Vernon saw it. She'd been watching for something like this for years and had made a habit of getting to the post before anyone else, and opened it at the kitchen table while Harry ate toast. She read it once, then set it down. "Well," she said. Harry looked up. Saw her expression, not surprised, but settled, the way someone looks when a thing they predicted finally arrives. "What is it?" She slid it across the table to him. He read it. His face went through surprise, delight, confusion, and then back to delight, cycling through them with the efficiency of someone who leads with his heart. "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry," he read aloud, like the words were a gift. "This is real." "Yes. There's a school. A magic school. That appears to be the case." He looked up at her, grinning. "You already knew something like this was coming." "I suspected." "You always know." "I always think," she corrected. "There's a difference. Knowing implies certainty. I work with probabilities." "Zah," he said, with enormous fondness. "We're going to a magic school." She looked at the letter again. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. She felt something move through her that was not quite excitement. She had left excitement behind somewhere around the age of 8 in her last life, but was adjacent to it. The feeling of a game board expanding, new pieces being placed, the shape of a longer contest beginning to reveal itself. "We are," she agreed. "We should be adequately prepared." Vernon burned the next 6 letters before they could open them. Azula retrieved the 7th from the fireplace before it finished burning and read the relevant lines from the charred remains while Vernon watched with a face the color of a radish. When the letters started arriving by the dozen, 50 in one day, then 100, the mail slot vomiting parchment, letters falling down the chimney, letters appearing on the breakfast plates, Azula watched Vernon's mounting panic with something close to professional appreciation. Whoever was sending these had resources and determination. She approved of both. When they were bundled into a car and driven to a shack on a rock in the middle of the sea in a storm, Azula sat on the floor with her back against the wall and her arms around her knees, watching the thunder light up the windows, and waited. At midnight exactly, she felt it. Harry stirred beside her. He was counting down. "Happy birthday," he said. "Happy birthday," she returned. A moment later, the door came off its hinges. The largest man she had ever seen ducked through the doorway, shaking rain from a coat the size of a small tent, and looked around the dark interior of the shack with bright, beetle-black eyes. "Couldn't make us a cup of tea, could ya?" he said to no one in particular. "Long journey." Vernon was on his feet with a rifle in his hands. She'd clocked it under the bed, hadn't mentioned it because it wasn't a real threat yet, and pointing it at the large man, who looked at the rifle the way most people look at a mildly irritating moth. "Hadn't done that if I were ya," the large man said. "I demand you leave this house immediately," Vernon said, his voice doing the thing it did when he was afraid, going higher and more authoritative at the same time. "These children are under my protection and, funny way of showing it," the large man said, looking at the cupboard door that was still visible even here. "They'd asked for a bedroom at Privet Drive and been denied." The large man seemed to understand what he was looking at and his expression tightened into something that wasn't quite anger but was right next to it. He turned from Vernon with the deliberate ease of someone who has genuinely decided the conversation is over, and he looked at the twins, and his expression changed entirely. "Harry," he said, in a voice that had been weathered by decades into something warm and rough at the same time. "Last time I saw ya, you were just a baby." His eyes moved to Azalea. They stayed there a moment longer. "And you must be Azalea." "Azza," she said. "Right. Azza." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize, curious, careful, like he'd been given some particular briefing about her and was checking it against what he found. I'm Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. And you too, Inch. He reached into his enormous coat and produced a slightly squashed cake with pink icing. Got some things to talk about. He sat on the floor. He didn't fit on anything else. Vernon made several more attempts at authority. Hagrid ignored them with the particular patience of someone who has dealt with a lot of weather and knows that the sensible thing is to wait it out. Eventually Vernon ran out of steam and sat down in a corner making a noise like a deflating thing. Knew your parents, Hagrid said, to both of them, peeling back the cake wrapping. Good people. The best people. Your mum, brightest witch of her age, everyone always said so, and everyone was right. Your dad, well. He smiled, wide and a little sad. He would have been proud of the both of you, I'll say that for sure. Harry asked questions. Many of them, in rapid succession, about his parents, about the magic, about Hogwarts, about what everything meant. Hagrid answered each one with patience that Azula found she couldn't fault him for, because Harry deserved that patience and Hagrid was giving it freely. She said nothing for a long time. She watched Hagrid and assessed him, genuinely kind, extremely capable of violence but genuinely uninterested in it, devoted to Dumbledore with the fidelity of someone who had been saved by him once and never stopped paying it back. Useful. Probably trustworthy. An unknown quantity at the outer edges, where loyalty to Dumbledore and loyalty to the twins might not point the same direction. She would watch that edge. Can I ask you something, she said, when Harry had run through the first wave of questions. Hagrid looked at her. Course ya can. What does Dumbledore want with us? A pause. Not long, but there. Hagrid's big hands moved on his umbrella, a small adjustment. He's the headmaster at Hogwarts. He wants to get ya properly educated. That's what he'd like us to think he wants, she said, pleasantly. What does he actually want? The pause was longer this time. You're 11 years old, Hagrid said, with what she recognized as an attempt to dismiss the question by pointing at the asker rather than the question. Almost. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was calculating, not in a threatening way, but in the way someone does when a thing is stranger and more interesting than the briefing suggested. You're something, aren't ya? He said finally. It wasn't quite a question. I'm someone, she corrected. There's a difference. Hagrid stared at her. Then he let out a laugh like a thunderclap, enormous and completely genuine, and shook his head. Right, he said. Right, yeah. You're something, someone, fair enough. The laugh settled into a grin. I'll tell you what I can on the way to Diagon Alley. Fair. She considered this. Fair, she said. Harry was looking between them with an expression of pure delight. He loved it when she did this, she could tell, from the particular quality of his attention, that there was something deeply satisfying to him about watching her take a conversation apart and reassemble it in a shape she preferred. He'd told her once that it was like watching someone do magic before you knew magic was real. She'd told him it was just logic. He'd said that was what made it magical. She hadn't had a good answer for that. The storm was still going outside, rattling the shack's thin walls, but inside it felt suddenly warmer. Hagrid was cutting the birthday cake with a knife from his coat. Harry was asking about Quidditch with the focused energy of someone who has just discovered something wonderful. Dudley, who had been cowering in a corner, made the mistake of reaching for the cake and Hagrid pointed his umbrella at him with the casual certainty of someone who knows exactly what he's holding, and Dudley retreated. Azula accepted her slice. It was very good cake, pink icing with Happy Birthday Harry and Ozza written in slightly wobbly letters, and she ate it in small, precise bites while the storm knocked itself out against the windows. She was going to a school. She was going to enter a world that had shaped itself around the idea of her brother as a symbol and had, as far as she could tell, prepared nothing and no one for the reality of him as a person. She was going to walk into a power structure that was older than she was in either of her lives, that had its own gravity, its own rules, its own people who thought the rules served them. She thought about what she knew: power structures were not permanent. They were just arrangements that hadn't been challenged correctly yet. She thought about Hogwarts, and Dumbledore, and Voldemort, and whatever shape the game board would take when they arrived at it. She thought about Harry beside her, eating cake, asking Hagrid about dragon eggs with the cheerful intensity of someone who has never once in his life considered that he might not be allowed to ask. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that had no warmth in it, only edge, only intention. She was ready. She had been ready for years. The world was simply catching up. Chapter 2, Diagon Alley. Burns politely. The boat Hagrid borrowed to get them back to the mainland sat low in the water under his weight, and Azula sat in the bow watching the coastline resolve itself out of the early morning fog while Harry asked Hagrid 17 consecutive questions about Hogwarts. Hagrid answered each one with the patient enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved the subject and had been waiting for an audience that matched his energy. She let them talk. She was thinking. The letter had said, "We await your owl." She didn't have an owl. She'd been sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs for the better part of a decade. The magical world had sent 100 letters to a shack in the middle of the sea rather than simply sending Hagrid sooner, which told her something about how that world operated. It had protocols that it followed even when the protocols were clearly inadequate, which meant it was either bureaucratically rigid or had reasons for the delay it wasn't advertising. Either option was interesting. Hagrid had told her, on his third cup of tea in the shack, what he was able to, that Harry was famous in their world for surviving the killing curse, that Dumbledore had placed them with the Dursleys for protective purposes, that Hogwarts was the finest school of magic in Britain and possibly the world. He'd said it all with the confidence of someone delivering good news, which told her he believed it. What he hadn't said, what he'd moved around carefully, like a man who knows there's a hole in the floor but isn't sure exactly where, was why Dumbledore had made the specific choices he'd made, and what the protection at the Dursleys actually cost. She knew what it cost. She'd lived it. She was disinclined to find it a reasonable price. Azza. Harry nudged her elbow. Hagrid says there's a bank. There's always a bank, she said. Gringotts, Hagrid said, with the particular reverence large men sometimes have for institutions that are bigger than them. Run by goblins. Best security in the world. Wouldn't want to rob it, I'll tell ya that for free. Are there vaults? She asked. For our family. Your parents left well provided for, yeah. He said it carefully, knowing the weight of parents left. We'll go there first. She nodded. The fog was thinning. She could see the mainland now, the regular grey and green of England in summer, sensible and unmystical and completely at odds with what she knew was folded inside it. She thought about banks. She thought about goblins. She thought about the very specific kind of leverage that sat inside a vault with your name on it. Good, she thought. We'll start there. London arrived around them like a theatre set, buses and black cabs and people in business clothes moving with the focused misery of morning commuters, and then Hagrid steered them down a side street and through a pub called the Leaky Cauldron, which smelled like old beer and wood smoke and something underneath both that was sharp and mineral and alive in a way normal pub smells weren't. The pub was dark and small and every person in it looked up when they walked in. Then they looked at Harry, and the recognition moved across the room like a wave. She saw it, face to face, a ripple of realizing, and then people were on their feet, people were coming over, people were saying Harry Potter like it was a prayer and an announcement at the same time. Harry handled it with characteristic grace, which meant he looked simultaneously touched and mortified. He shook hands with people whose names he didn't know and smiled because he was Harry and smiling at people was simply his default setting. Azula stood beside him. She watched the room. She caught the ones who were looking at her. There were a few, sidelong glances, quick assessments, because apparently even in the wizarding world twins drew a second look. She gave nothing back. She was measuring depth, who in this room was looking at Harry with genuine feeling and who was looking with calculation. Most of the faces were genuine. 2 weren't. She filed those 2 away without breaking her expression. "Who's this, then?" someone asked, a short witch with an acid green hat. Not unkindly, genuinely curious. "Is this his twin sister?" Azula said. "Azalea Potter. You can call me Azza." The witch blinked. "I didn't know, that is, no one said." "No," Azula agreed. "No one did." She let that sit. She didn't say anything more. She'd found, across 2 lifetimes, that the most effective way to make people understand something was to state the fact and give them space to feel the implication without walking them through it. The witch with the green hat understood that no one knowing about Azalea Potter was a thing that should maybe trouble her a little. The understanding showed in her face in a small, involuntary way. Good. Let it trouble her. Hagrid moved them on before the pub could become a full reception, which she appreciated. Through the back, into a small courtyard, where Hagrid counted bricks in a wall with the practiced ease of someone who has done it 1,000 times, and the wall opened up like a curtain drawing back. Diagon Alley. Harry made a sound she didn't have a word for, pure, involuntary wonder, the kind that gets past your defenses because you're not expecting to need them. She understood it. Even with everything she knew, even with the 2 lifetimes and the strategic mind and the careful management of her own reactions, even with all of that, what opened up in front of them was magnificent. It was a street that knew what it was. Crooked buildings and colors that shouldn't work together but did. Shop windows full of things that moved. People in robes and pointed hats buying things that breathed. An owl in a cage doing something complicated with a letter. A cauldron in a window that was apparently stirring itself, slowly, with great dignity. Above it all, the sky was doing something that the physics she knew didn't quite account for, a brightness that seemed to come from everywhere at once, warm and sourceless, like the magic of the place was warm enough to light the air itself. Right then, Hagrid said, somewhere behind them. "Gringotts first." She moved. Harry moved with her. The goblins were better than she'd expected. She'd expected small and difficult. She got small and precise and deeply, almost beautifully, transactional. They didn't care about Harry Potter's fame or Azalea Potter's unusual stillness or the fact that Hagrid was large enough to block their architectural sight lines. They cared about the vault numbers and the authentication and the business at hand, and there was something genuinely refreshing about that. The goblin at the front desk looked at them both with eyes like polished amber and said, in a voice like scratching a formal letter into stone, Vault 687. Potter Family Trust. He looked at the letter Hagrid presented. He looked at Harry. He looked at Azalea. 2 beneficiaries listed. "That's right," she said. The goblin looked at her for a moment longer than he'd looked at Harry, which was interesting. "Miss Potter," he said. Flat. Not unwelcoming, just, precise. "I'd like to understand our holdings," she said. "Generally speaking. Not just the trust vault." Hagrid made a sound. The goblin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the amber eyes, a very small recalibration. "The trust vault is what's available to you at present," he said. "Your parents' primary vault remains sealed pending what?" A pause. "Pending the terms of the estate settlement." "Who controls the estate settlement?" "Miss Potter, I'd like a copy of the relevant documents," she said. "We're entitled to them as beneficiaries. I'll collect them when we come back for our school supplies." Another pause, longer this time. The goblin was looking at her with an expression she recognized from her last life. It was the look of someone reassessing the classification they'd given you when you walked in. She'd gotten it from generals and ministers and her own father. On the rare occasions she'd done something that shifted the shape of what they thought she was. "That can be arranged," the goblin said. "Thank you." She meant it genuinely. Goblins, she was already deciding, were people she could work with. The cart ride down to the vault was spectacular and Harry loved every second of it, leaning into the speed with his hair streaming back and his eyes bright, and she allowed herself 11 seconds of leaning into it too before returning to the comfortable analysis of structural depth and geological stability that was what her brain defaulted to when given no other task. The vault was full in the way that only old money is full, not organized, not curated, just accumulated, the solid weight of a family that had existed for generations before a single catastrophic night. Harry looked at it with wide eyes and the slight discomfort of someone who has never had money and isn't sure what to do now that he does. She looked at it and thought, leverage, options, ability to move without asking permission. Not greed. Just the arithmetic of freedom. Hagrid was also retrieving something else, a small grubby package from a higher security vault, which he treated with the careful avoidance of a man under specific instructions. She clocked it. Said nothing. Filed it. Back on the surface, blinking in the sourceless alley light, Harry counted the gold coins in his hand like each one was a small miracle. "We're rich," he said, with genuine disbelief. "We're comfortable," she said. "Rich is a category that comes with different obligations. Let's be precise." He looked at her. "You are the strangest person I know. You don't know very many people. I'm going to know more soon." He grinned. "Magic school." She almost smiled. "Magic school," she agreed. They collected school supplies with Hagrid, who navigated the alley with the ease of a man who has done it every September for years. Harry was vibrating with the energy of someone who has been handed an entire world and doesn't know which piece to pick up first, so she quietly organized the prioritization. Robes first because they were needed for fitting, then books because books were the foundation of everything else, then equipment. Madame Malkin's fitting was quick and functional. She stood on the raised platform and let the enchanted measuring tape do its work while Harry chatted with the boy next to him. She heard the conversation before she focused on it, a voice that was confident in the particular way of someone who has been told all their life that confidence was their birthright. Fair hair. A pointed face that was already forming into something that would be handsome in a practiced, deliberate way. Prefect posture. The kind of robes you notice because they're expensive without being showy, the choice of someone whose family knows that being showy is for people who aren't actually secure. "Be in Slytherin, of course," the boy was saying. "Our whole family's been there. Imagine being in Hufflepuff. I think I'd leave." He laughed. It was a good laugh, controlled, designed to invite others in. "What about you?" "I don't really know anything about the houses," Harry said, with characteristic openness. "Don't you?" The boy looked genuinely surprised, which told her his information network had a gap in it. He'd been told about Harry Potter but not told about the Dursleys, not understood that Harry had grown up outside this world entirely. "I'm Harry," Harry said. The pause was fractional. The fair-haired boy knew the name. She could see him recalibrating in real time, Harry Potter, here, fitting for robes, not recognizing him. "Draco," the boy said. "Draco Malfoy." She turned her head. He felt it and looked over. Their eyes met. His were gray, cool, assessing. She recognized the mechanism. It was the same mechanism she used, the quick hierarchical arrangement of everyone in a room. She watched him run it on her and saw the moment it got complicated for him. She wasn't giving him anything to work with, no deference, no interest, no performance of being impressed by the name. "Azalea Potter," she said. Something moved across his face. The calculation accelerating. "Both of them," he said, quietly. "Both of us," she confirmed. He looked at her for another moment. Looked at Harry. Back at her. She could see him running the updated numbers, the Potter twins, both here, one a known quantity and the other a complete unknown who was looking at him the way his father looked at people before deciding whether they were worth the conversation. "I didn't know you existed," he said. It came out more honest than he probably intended. "Very few people did," she said pleasantly. "Disappointing, isn't it, when information networks have gaps?" His eyes sharpened. Not offended, interested. She filed that away too. He was quick and he knew it, and he was looking at her with the particular attention of someone who has just found something they want to understand. Useful or obstacle, she'd thought. She was adjusting the parameters of that binary already. "You're going to be interesting," he said, and there was no insult in it, just the flat, almost clinical observation of someone who has decided to be honest because performance would be pointless. "I know," she said. He blinked. Then, surprising her slightly, he smiled, real, small, not the designed version. "Slytherin, then?" "We'll see." "Right." He looked at Harry again, who had been watching this exchange with the attentive confusion of someone watching a conversation happen in a language he mostly speaks. "And you?" "Gryffindor, probably," Harry said cheerfully. "At least, that's what Hagrid seemed to think." Draco made the Hufflepuff face, the slight, involuntary wince. Harry noticed and laughed. Draco looked startled by the laugh, by the complete absence of self-consciousness in it. The fitting ended. They separated. On the way out, Draco turned back and looked at Azalea one more time, the kind of look you give something you intend to return to. She filed it. Walked on. Flourish and Blots was, in her estimation, the best place in the alley. She moved through the shelves the way she moved through most environments she liked, quickly and efficiently, identifying what she wanted, but also with a secondary scan for things she hadn't known she wanted until she found them. The standard curriculum books went in the basket. Then she branched, Advanced Magical Theory, Volume 1 and 2. A History of the Wizarding World, the unabridged edition. Wand Lore and Its Principles. A slim, battered volume called The Properties of Magic by someone called Ptolemy Brightwater that looked like it hadn't been pulled off the shelf in 30 years and whose table of contents made her slow down and read it twice. Harry was buying Quidditch Through the Ages with the focus of a scholar. She put The Properties of Magic in the basket. The shopkeeper looked at her choices and then at her and said, with the polished caution of someone who has had interesting customers before, "Getting a head start." "Making up for lost time," she said. He didn't know what to do with that. She paid and they moved on. Ollivander's was last. She'd been thinking about the wand since she understood what a wand was. In her last life, fire had answered her because she commanded it. There had been no intermediary, no tool, just the direct line from her will to the world's response. A wand was an intermediary. A wand was, essentially, a partner, and she had complicated feelings about partnerships, which was probably putting it mildly. The shop was narrow and quiet and smelled of sawdust and something chemical and alive at the same time. The shelves went up further than made architectural sense, and the light was wrong in the specific way of a space that is slightly out of phase with the ordinary laws of things. Mr. Ollivander appeared from the back in a way that suggested he had never arrived anywhere in his life but had simply always been wherever he needed to be. He was old in the way of things that have decided to continue existing on principle, thin and white-haired and with eyes like polished mirrors, not warm, not cold, just reflective. He looked at Harry first. A moment. Then he looked at Azalea and the silver eyes moved differently, more slowly, more carefully. "Miss Potter," he said. "I expected you, of course. Both of you." He tilted his head. "Though I confess I expected you slightly more than your brother. If that makes sense." "It doesn't yet," she said. "It might." Something moved in those mirror eyes. Almost approval. "Let's see." He looked at Harry. "Let's start with Mr. Potter, shall we?" The process with Harry was extraordinary in the ordinary way, wand after wand, trails of light and sparks and minor destruction, until Holly in Phoenix Feather found him and the warmth it put in the air was something even she felt from across the room. Harry looked at the wand and looked at Ollivander and said, "Brilliant," in a very small, reverent voice that she mentally bookmarked under things to protect. Then Ollivander turned to her. "Now," he said, and there was something different in his voice. A careful quality. "Miss Azalea Potter." "Just Azza." "Azza." He considered her. "Tell me, "Are you right-handed or left-handed?" "Both, equally." He looked at her for a long moment. "Right then," he said, very quietly. "Right then." What followed was different from Harry's fitting in a way that was immediately obvious and difficult to articulate. With Harry, the wands had been energetic, sparks, motion, trying and discarding. With her, the wands were quieter. Some produced nothing at all, not even the small dissatisfied fizz. One or two produced something, a warmth, a slight tremor in the air, but Ollivander kept setting them aside with an expression that was moving steadily from practiced calm towards something she could only identify as professional fascination. He disappeared into the back. Came out with a box that was dustier than the others, from a higher shelf. "I've had this one for many years," he said. 11¾ inches. Black walnut. He set it on the counter between them. "The core is unusual. I've only ever made 3 wands with this particular core." He paused. "Thunderbird tail feather." She picked it up. The moment her fingers closed around it, the shop went bright. Not sparks, not the exuberant shower of Harry's moment, nothing performative. Just light, sudden and total, like a door thrown open into a room where the sun was already waiting. It lasted for 3 seconds. Then it collapsed back into the ordinary dim of the shop, but the air in the room was different afterward, charged, crystalline, the way air feels after lightning has moved through it. Ollivander's expression was completely still. She looked at the wand. The wand, if she was imagining things, looked back. "I've sold that one twice before," Ollivander said, in a voice that was working to stay level. "Both times it was returned." "Returned by whom?" "Witches who found it difficult." He looked at her carefully. "Thunderbird feather is deeply intuitive magic. It responds to the witch's will directly, almost without mediation. Most witches find that frightening. The wand demands a level of certainty that is uncomfortable," she finished. "For most people." "Yes." He looked at her. "You are not most people." "No," she agreed. "I'm not." He watched her turn the wand in her fingers. She was feeling the weight distribution, the density of the wood, the way it sat in the grip. She was also feeling something else, the sensation of something recognizing her, the same way Harry's eyes had recognized her in that first moment in the crib. Not the same feeling. But the same shape. "How much?" she said. He quoted a price. She paid it. He watched her put the wand in her pocket with the attention of a man who is going to be thinking about this for a while. "May I ask," Ollivander said, as they were leaving, "how you feel about the wand?" "The witches who returned it said it felt overwhelming. Like being looked through." She considered the question honestly. "It feels like being understood," she said. "I can see why that might be frightening." They left Ollivander standing in his narrow doorway looking after them with silver eyes that were, for the first time, not quite so reflective. Something had gotten through. Hagrid bought Harry a birthday present in the form of a snowy owl, which Harry named Hedwig from a book of famous witches and wizards he'd read in 3 minutes in the bookshop. The owl looked at Azalea from the cage with large amber eyes and Azalea looked back and they conducted a mutual assessment that seemed to satisfy them both. They had lunch at a small outdoor table, Hagrid fitting himself onto a bench that complained visibly about the experience, Harry feeding scraps to Hedwig and interrogating Hagrid about Quidditch rules and positions and teams. She ate her sandwich and looked out at the alley around them. She was building a map. Not a physical one, a relational one. Who held power here? Where it sat? What moved it? The alley was a picture of the wizarding world in miniature, old money and old names, the comfortable assumption of permanent order, the kind of place that was very good at continuing to exist exactly as it was because no one had yet arrived who felt strongly enough about changing it to do anything as inconvenient as actually trying. She thought about what Hagrid had said and hadn't said. About Dumbledore and his plans and his careful arrangement of their lives in Surrey. She thought about the estate documents she'd asked for at Gringotts, which would tell her things about how the Potters' affairs had been managed in the last decade. She thought about the small grubby package Hagrid had collected from the high-security vault and hadn't mentioned. She thought about Harry, beside her, reading the Quidditch rules with his brow furrowed in concentration, who would walk into this world seeing the best of it and needing someone beside him who could also see the rest. She had read the properties of magic on the cart ride from Gringotts because she read quickly and she'd needed something to do with her hands. Brightwater's central argument was that magic was not a tool but a relationship, between the practitioner and the natural world, between intention and outcome, between what you wanted and what you were willing to do to get it. The wand was not the source, it was the conduit. The source was always the witch or wizard. She had known this. She'd known it since she was 15 months old and built something between herself and a killing curse out of sheer refusal. But seeing it formalized, seeing someone else arrive at the same principle through decades of theory, was satisfying in the way that good confirmation always is. "Azza," Harry said, pulling her back. "Which position d'you reckon is hardest? Keeper or seeker?" "Seeker," she said, without thinking. "Keeper is reactive. Seeker requires you to hold the full picture of the game while pursuing a separate objective on a different scale. It's cognitively more demanding." Harry stared at her. "You've never played Quidditch." "I've never done most things I have opinions about. That's what thinking is for." He laughed. Hagrid chuckled. Even the owl made a sound. She looked at the wand in her pocket. She could feel it the way you feel a new weight when you've been carrying something, the slight warmth of it, the aliveness. She thought about the coming months. The train. The school. The sorting. The things Dumbledore had planned and the things she was going to do instead. She thought about Draco Malfoy's grey eyes, running the updated numbers. She thought about the Gringotts goblin who had arranged for the estate documents. She thought about the way the wizarding world had arranged Harry as its symbol and not bothered to check whether he wanted the job. She thought, there's a lot of work to do. She didn't mind work. She'd never minded it, in either life. What she minded was waste, wasted time, wasted potential, the waste of people being arranged by other people's calculations without being consulted about their own lives. Harry was not going to be wasted. She had decided this before she could walk and she had not revisited the decision because it didn't need revisiting. He was not a symbol. He was not a weapon. He was not a piece in anyone's game. He was her brother. That was the end of the analysis. "Can we go back through the alley?" Harry asked Hagrid. "Before we leave? I want to look at the broom shop." "We got time," Hagrid said, already standing, the bench releasing a sigh of profound relief. Harry jumped up, Hedwig's cage balanced in one hand, the Quidditch book in the other. He looked at her, checking, the way he always did, the instinct of someone who has never wanted to go anywhere she couldn't follow. She stood up. "Go," she said. "I'll catch up." He went, towing Hagrid in his wake like a small bright planet pulling a moon. She put her hand in her pocket and felt the wand. "Thunderbird," Ollivander had said. "Responds to the witch's will directly, almost without mediation." Almost. She thought, that'll do. She walked into the alley, into the sourceless golden light of a world that had no idea what was coming for it, and caught up with her brother. Chapter 3, The Sorting Speaks First. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Azula had been awake since 4. Not from nerves. She didn't do nerves, or rather she did them the way she did everything, processed, filed, converted into information. She'd been awake because there was a problem she hadn't solved yet, and unsolved problems had a way of sitting at the base of her skull like a stone until she dealt with them. The problem was the sorting. She'd read everything available about the 4 houses in A History of the Wizarding World, which had given her the official version: Gryffindor for the brave, Hufflepuff for the loyal, Ravenclaw for the clever, Slytherin for the ambitious. She'd cross-referenced this with the social reality she'd already observed, the way Hagrid had said better Gryffindor than Slytherin, the way Draco Malfoy had assumed Slytherin, the way you assume a family business, the way the wizarding world had organized its entire social mythology around a sorting that happened to 11-year-olds before they knew enough to have real opinions about themselves. She was going to be sorted into Slytherin. She knew this the way she knew most things about herself, not with arrogance, just with accuracy. She was strategic and ambitious and ruthlessly unsentimental about most things except Harry, and the hat would find the same picture she found when she examined herself without flattery. The problem was not where she'd be sorted. The problem was what it meant for the distance between her and Harry. She had spent every night of the last 10 years within arm's reach of him. She had been the geography of his safety, the fixed point that oriented his world, and she had let it be that way because it was also the truth of hers. Different houses meant different dormitories, different common rooms, different daily schedules, and she needed to decide before they arrived how she was going to manage that gap without making it Harry's problem. She was still working on it at 4:30 when Harry woke up. He always woke up when she'd been awake too long, some frequency between them that she didn't have a scientific explanation for, and said, from his side of the dark, "Can't sleep." "I'm thinking." "About what?" "Logistics." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "We'll be in different houses, won't we?" She turned her head. "Probably." "Hermione Granger, that girl from the bookshop, the one who recognized us, she said she hopes she's in Gryffindor." "You're not going to be in Gryffindor." "No." He said nothing for a moment, processing this. She watched the ceiling. Outside, Privet Drive was doing its pre-dawn silence, that deep suburban quiet that always felt slightly artificial to her, like a stage between scenes. "You'll be okay," Harry said. He said it with certainty, not reassurance. He wasn't trying to make her feel better. He was just stating what he knew. "You'll take over whatever house you're in within a week." 10 days, she said. "I want to observe first." He laughed, soft and sleepy. 10 days. A pause. "I'll be okay too." I'll figure it out." "You will," she said, and meant it completely. Harry was going to be fine. Harry was the kind of person who generated belonging wherever he went, not because he tried to but because the quality of his attention made everyone around him feel like the most important person in the room. He was going to collect friends the way sunlight collects plants, effortlessly, just by being what he was. She was going to have to be more deliberate about it. "Go back to sleep," she said. "We have a train to catch." He was asleep in 4 minutes. She lay in the dark and finished solving the logistics problem, and by the time the sky outside started going gray she had a working framework and some peace about it. Platform 9 3/4 was everything the regular King's Cross was not, loud and full of color, owls and cats and toads conducting their own separate dramas over the heads of the crowds, parents in robes saying goodbyes that ranged from efficient to theatrical. The Scarlet Train sat at the platform with the satisfied solidity of something that has been making this journey for a very long time and intends to keep making it. Petunia had driven them. She'd said almost nothing on the journey, she'd barely said anything in the weeks since Hagrid's visit, just moved around them with the slightly altered quality of someone who is reconsidering a long-held position and hasn't arrived at the new one yet. At the station's main entrance, she'd stopped and looked at them both, and there had been a complicated moment where Azula thought she might actually say something real. She'd said, "Be careful." Then she'd gotten back in the car. Harry had watched her go. "That's the closest she's come to nice." "It's closer than I expected," Azula said honestly. They found the platform through the barrier, Harry first, nervous and laughing at the same time, and she second, walking through the impossible with the focused calm of someone who has already done impossible things and simply updated their model of what possible means. The train swallowed them. She found a compartment near the middle of the train, settled Harry in it, stacked their trunks, and then stood in the doorway and looked at the corridor with the particular attention of someone conducting a census. She saw the Weasley family, impossible to miss. There were 7 of them and they were all red-haired and loud in the generous way of people who have never been made to feel that taking up space was wrong. She clocked the twins immediately, the ones who were clearly always in the middle of something, and filed them, funny, quick, dangerous if directed, probably bored. The youngest boy, their age, anxious in the way of someone following a lot of older siblings, was trying to lift his trunk and failing. She saw Draco Malfoy, further down the platform, with two larger boys flanking him like furniture and his father beside him in dark robes. The father looked the way Draco would look in 30 years if he chose the easy version of himself, handsome and cold and very certain of the shape of the world. He was looking at the Weasley family with an expression that told her everything she needed to know about what kind of certain he was. She saw a girl standing alone near the train door, reading a very thick book and not looking up, with the focused indifference of someone who has decided that the social chaos around her was categorically less interesting than whatever was on the page. Brown hair, slightly wild. Badge on her robes already, which meant she'd sewn it on herself, which meant she cared about being ready and cared about showing it, which meant she was probably terrified underneath it and using preparation as armor. Azula recognized the mechanism. "Come on," she said to Harry, and led him down the platform to where the girl was standing. "Hello," Harry said, because that was what Harry did. He simply addressed people, directly, as though it had never occurred to him that they might not want to be addressed. The girl looked up. Her eyes were large and very quick, doing the same thing Azula's did, cycling through recognition, assessment, recalibration. "Harry Potter," she said. Then her eyes moved. "And Azalea Potter. I read about you, well, about Harry, I mean, but then someone mentioned, that is," she collected herself with visible effort. "Hermione Granger." Azula said. "Right. Yes." Hermione looked at them both, and Azula watched her do what most people didn't do. She looked at them as separate people, her eyes moving between them and arriving at different assessments for each. "I've read all the course books, obviously. Some of them twice." "Have you?" "Most of them," Azula said. Hermione stopped. "Really? I had time." Hermione looked at her with an expression that Azula had never seen directed at herself before in either lifetime and didn't immediately know what to do with. It was recognition, again, the same shape as Harry's, in the crib, and the wands, in Ollivander's shop, but different. This was pure recognition. This was "you exist at the level I exist at," from someone who had probably spent most of her life looking for that level and not finding many people on it. Azula felt something she didn't have a clean word for. She filed it under deal with later and held the door of the train compartment open. "Get in," she said. "Both of you." The countryside went past in the way countryside does from a train, green and rolling, endlessly itself, the specific British pastoral that seemed immune to any sense of urgency. Harry and Hermione were talking about course books and Harry was being charming about the fact that he hadn't read all of them and Hermione was being charmed against her better judgment, and Azula was watching the corridor through the glass panel of the compartment door. The youngest Weasley appeared, knocked, asked if there was space. Harry said yes immediately. Ron Weasley, she got his name quickly, was nervous and kind and laughed too loudly at things that weren't quite funny enough yet, the way people do when they want very badly for something to work. Harry liked him within 5 minutes. She could tell by the quality of Harry's attention, the way it settled in, stopped performing and became genuine. She watched Ron and Harry and Hermione all reaching the same conclusion about each other at different speeds. Ron was ahead on Harry, behind on Hermione. Hermione was ahead on Harry, uncertain about Ron. Harry was pulling both of them toward him without trying, the social equivalent of gravity, and she sat back and let it happen because these were Harry's people and she knew it, the way she knew most things, not from evidence but from the quality of the certainty. She was less involved in the process. She could feel Hermione glancing at her periodically with the specific attention of someone who wants to say something and keeps deciding against it. Eventually she turned and looked at Hermione directly. Hermione said, with a rush, "You really read most of the books?" "Yes." "Which ones didn't you finish?" 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi. Repetitive Structure. "I read the index and the relevant chapters." Hermione considered this. That's actually probably sufficient for first year, she said, slowly, like someone admitting something slightly against their principles. Though the section on fanged geraniums. I read that part. A pause. Then Hermione smiled, real, unguarded, the smile of someone who has not smiled unguardedly at a peer in a long time. I didn't know what to expect, she said. From you. People talk about Harry a lot but they don't really, no one mentions you at all, which I thought was strange. Most people find it convenient, Azula said. Hermione frowned. That's not right. No, she agreed. It isn't. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Hermione went back to her book and Azula went back to watching the corridor, and something had been established between them that neither of them would have been able to articulate precisely but that both of them knew was real. Draco appeared in the corridor, flanked by his two large accessories, and knocked on the compartment door with the particular confidence of someone who has never had a door not open for him. Harry opened it. The conversation went the way she'd expected, Draco offering alliance, his version of it, the right people, the right families, the right side, and Harry turning it down with the instinctive directness that made him Harry, not particularly aggressive but perfectly clear. Ron made his contribution by bristling, which told Draco everything he wanted to know about that relationship. Draco's eyes moved to her. She had not contributed. She was sitting in the corner and she was, she knew, unreadable. Draco had been trying to read her since Madame Malkin's and she had given him no purchase, and she watched him decide to retreat now rather than overextend in a context that wasn't favorable. Azza, he said, just to her, separate from the rest of the conversation. Not aggressive. Almost careful. Draco, she returned. He held her gaze for a second. Something moved in those gray eyes that she was beginning to think was genuine curiosity, which was the most interesting thing she'd found in this world so far besides the wand. Then he left. Ron launched into a speech about Malfoys and his opinions of them, which was full of accurate observations about Draco's family and inaccurate projections onto Draco himself, and she let him give it because he needed to and because it wasn't wrong enough to correct yet. Harry listened with the focused seriousness he gave everything. Hermione was looking at her again. You know him, Hermione said quietly, when Ron and Harry had moved on to something else. I met him at the fitting. I don't know him. But you're watching him differently from how you watch everyone else. She looked at Hermione. You're observant. So are you. A pause. What do you think of him? Undecided, she said. He's intelligent and he's been given a very specific story about how the world works and he hasn't had reason to question it yet. People like that are either fixed permanently in the story or they break out of it when the story stops fitting. I don't know which he is yet. Hermione blinked. Turn this over. That's quite generous, actually. It's accurate, she said. Generous would be assuming the better outcome. The castle appeared through the windows in the rain and the dark, and even she felt it, the size of it, the impossible accumulated weight of 1,000 years of magic, the way it sat in the landscape not like something that had been built there but like something the landscape had grown around. It was alive in the specific way that old places become alive when enough intention has been poured into them over enough time. Harry's face, illuminated by the lightning, she stopped cataloging. Some things she just kept without filing. The boats across the Black Lake were Hagrid's domain, and he navigated them with the ease of annual practice, and nobody spoke very much because the castle was doing something to the air that made speaking feel beside the point. She sat in the front of the boat, water on her face from the rain, and looked up at the towers and thought about what was in them, the teachers, the history, the particular shape of the world she was entering. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall. Tall and precise and self-contained, with the quality of someone who has decided exactly who they are and found the decision permanent. She looked at the first years with the professional assessment of someone who has done this for decades and still takes it seriously, which Azula respected. Her eyes paused on Harry, expected, and then moved to Azalea and stayed for a moment longer. Azula looked back. McGonagall's eyes did a small, almost invisible recalibration. Then she moved on through the crowd. Good, Azula thought. They were ushered into a small chamber to wait, and there was a ghost, which she accepted as data and stored, and then the doors to the great hall opened and they walked in. The ceiling was the sky, or whatever was above the sky, or a perfect enchanted simulation of one that was so good it had become a kind of truth in its own right. The 4 tables stretched the length of the hall, hundreds of faces looking up at the new students with the collective attention of an audience at a theater, and it was the closest thing she'd felt to walking into the Fire Nation throne room, except that the architecture here was gothic and cold instead of red and hot. She preferred her version. The hat on the stool opened its brim and sang. She listened to the whole song because she was thorough, extracted the useful information, the original sorting process, the argument about which qualities mattered most, the hint in the final verses about a unity that had been lost, and waited. They went alphabetically. She watched each student go up, watched the hat consider, watched the house tables erupt for each choice. The Gryffindor table was the loudest, which was consistent with what she knew about Gryffindors. The Slytherin table applauded in a more contained way, which was also consistent. Granger, Hermione. Hermione walked up with the particular posture of someone who is very scared and has decided that perfect posture is the defense against anyone knowing it. The hat touched her head and went still for maybe 4 seconds, then bellowed, Gryffindor. Hermione's whole body released tension she hadn't visibly been holding. She walked to the Gryffindor table looking like someone who had just been given something they'd wanted so badly they'd been afraid to want it. Malfoy, Draco. He walked up with the ease of someone executing a predetermined plan. The hat barely touched his head. Slytherin. The hat had barely formed the first syllable before Draco was already moving, already settling at the Slytherin table with the satisfied ease of a puzzle piece that has found its place. He looked up and met her eyes across the hall. One corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. An acknowledgement. She looked away. Potter, Harry. The hall went electric. The whisper moved through it like wine through grass. Potter, did she say Potter, Harry Potter, and Harry walked up the aisle with his shoulders slightly hunched against the weight of all that attention, hat down over his eyes, and Azula felt the entirely unusual sensation of her hands wanting to do something without a clear direction for where to put the energy. She kept still. She watched. The hat took a long time. She could see it moving, speaking to Harry, the brim shifting. Harry's hands were gripping the sides of the stool. She knew, in the particular way she knew things about Harry, that it was offering him something and he was arguing about it, because Harry was constitutionally incapable of not arguing when he disagreed, even with a hat. Gryffindor. The table detonated. The twins, the Weasley twins, she'd placed them at the table earlier, stood up and roared. Ron Weasley, 2 students ahead of Harry in the alphabet, was already at the Gryffindor table and shouting something she couldn't make out. Harry made his way to them with the dazed look of someone who has just been accepted by something bigger than himself and is still deciding how he feels about it. He looked back at her from the table. Across the hall. She could see him doing what he always did, checking. Making sure she could see him. She could see him. She looked back with the steady, even look that she knew he could read, that she'd been giving him since they were toddlers in a cupboard, the one that meant, I'm here, I see you, we're fine. He settled. Turned forward. Potter, Azalea. She walked up. The hall had a different quality of silence for her name, not the electric excitement of Harry's, but something more uncertain, like an audience that hasn't been told whether to applaud or not. She was aware of the uncertainty and found it neither uncomfortable nor flattering. She sat on the stool, the hat dropped over her eyes, and the world went dark. The voice was inside her head, old, without being senile, the accumulated quality of 1,000 years of reading people. Well, it said. Interesting. She waited. I don't often get this, the hat said, and it seemed genuinely thoughtful about it. Someone who is, ah. Yes. You've been here before, haven't you? Not here, specifically. But, at a decision like this one, she said nothing. She'd learned that silence was usually more informative than speaking. Bravery, the hat mused. Yes, certainly, but not in the way Gryffindor means it, not instinct, not impulse. Yours is deliberate. You choose to be brave the way you choose your battles. A pause. Intelligence, yes, significant. Ravenclaw would suit the mind. But you're not interested in knowledge for its own sake, are you? You're interested in what it does. You're stalling, she thought at it. You've already decided. The hat made a sound that was almost amusement. You're right. I have. You know where you're going. Yes, she thought. It's an unusual Slytherin you'll make, the hat said, and there was something in the word unusual that carried weight. You don't want what most of them want. Power for its own sake doesn't interest you. But you want the ability to protect what you've decided to protect, and you want it completely, without compromise or apology, and that is the most Slytherin quality I have encountered in 30 years. She thought about Harry at the Gryffindor table. She thought about the distance. The distance will not break what you have, the hat said quietly. You built it on something stronger than proximity. She thought, I know that. I'm handling it. Yes, the hat said, with what she could only describe as respect. You are. Slytherin. The Slytherin table applauded. She lifted the hat off her head, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who was looking at her with an expression that was more complex than she'd expected from a woman who had presumably watched hundreds of sortings, and walked across the hall to the green and silver table. She sat down. The students around her were looking at her with various expressions: curiosity, the social calculation of figuring out placement, the practiced cool of people who have decided that enthusiasm is a vulnerability. She looked at the table. Then she looked up and found Harry again, across the hall. He was grinning. He raised his hand in a small wave. She raised 2 fingers in return, which was the closest she did to a wave. Ron Weasley, beside Harry, looked between them with the expression of someone trying to understand a private language and respecting it enough not to interrupt. She turned to face forward. The rest of the sorting finished. The headmaster stood. Albus Dumbledore was smaller than she'd expected. She'd built an image from Hagrid's description: greatest wizard of the age, defeated Grindelwald, the only one you know who ever feared, and the image had been large. The reality was an old man in robes the color of a summer evening, with half-moon glasses and a silver beard and eyes that were brilliantly, vividly blue and doing something behind them that she identified immediately. He was reading the room. Not in the way teachers read rooms, not attendance or energy or whether the new students were too tired to absorb information. He was reading the room the way she read rooms, the relational scan, the assessment of who sat where and what that said and what the patterns meant. He was also, specifically, reading her. She held his gaze for exactly as long as it would have been rude not to, then looked at her empty plate as the food appeared. He was smart. She'd known he would be. She'd been building his profile since before she arrived, from every piece of information Hagrid had and hadn't given, from the shape of the choices that had been made about their lives, from the nature of the protection he'd placed on Privet Drive and the cost it had been allowed to carry. He was the kind of smart that had convinced itself its own judgment was a form of morality, which was the most dangerous kind of smart there was. She knew the type. She'd been raised by a version of it. The feast was excellent. She ate with the efficiency of someone who appreciates good food without making an event of it and watched the Slytherin table with the focused peripheral vision she'd developed in a last life spent in rooms where political alliances were the primary cuisine. The social structure was already visible: Draco at the center of one cluster, the gravitational point around which several other students were organizing themselves. An older girl, 3rd year, she thought, who ran a different cluster with the careful casualness of someone who knows exactly how much effort they're putting into appearing not to put in effort. A boy at the far end of the table who sat alone and read during dinner, which either meant he was uninterested in the social game or very good at a different version of it. She noted them all. She started with nothing and revealed nothing. Azalea Potter, said the girl to her left. Second year, the signs were there. I didn't know there was an Azalea Potter. There is, she said. Are you anything like your brother? She considered this honestly. In some ways. Not in others. Which ways? She looked at the girl. Clear-eyed, direct, the specific kind of boldness that comes from being good at something and knowing it. Magic, she said. We're similar in that. And the rest? He's nicer, she said. The girl laughed, a real one, surprised. I'm Gemma Farley. I'm a prefect. I know, she said. I saw your badge in the entrance hall. A pause. You're observant. Yes. Gemma looked at her for a moment with the expression she was getting used to, the recalibration. You know, Gemma said slowly, first years usually try to make friends before they start, whatever it is you're doing. What am I doing? I don't know yet. Gemma's voice was genuinely curious. That's the part one find interesting. Azula looked down the table at Draco, who had been watching this exchange and quickly looked away when she caught him. She looked up at the teacher's table, Dumbledore, still reading the room, eating with the particular detachment of someone whose attention is elsewhere. A pale man with a turban who was sitting too still. A teacher with oil-black hair and a face like a closed door who was watching the Slytherin table with proprietary attention. That one would be Snape. She'd read enough to know the name. She looked at Snape and Snape looked back, and in the brief intersection of their gaze she felt the particular quality of someone who was trying to read her and finding the same thing she found in him, a surface that wasn't telling anyone what was below it. She looked away first. Not because she was retreating. Because she'd gotten what she needed and continuing the exchange gave him information she wasn't ready to give. Making friends isn't the immediate priority, she told Gemma. What is? She picked up her fork. Understanding, she said. I learn the room first. Then I decide what to do with what I know. Gemma was quiet for a moment. How long does that usually take you? She thought about 10 days. She thought about Harry's prediction. She thought about the specific efficiency of arriving somewhere and understanding it before it understood her. Not long, she said. The Slytherin common room was in the dungeons, which she approved of architecturally, cold and greenlit by the lake outside the windows, the water moving with slow, alien grace beyond the glass. There was a dim beauty to it that the people who dismissed Slytherin probably never thought about. She thought about it. She appreciated things that were beautiful in ways that required you to adjust your idea of beauty. She was given a bed in the first-year girls' dormitory and she made it up with the efficient precision of someone who has always been responsible for their own space and sat on the edge of it in the dark after the others were asleep and felt the dimensions of the new distance. Harry was in a tower. She was in the dungeons. The width of the castle between them, plus the width of the social world those spaces represented. She had known this was coming. She had solved the logistics problem on the morning of September 1st and she had a framework. She held the framework in her mind and checked its load-bearing points. He was safe. The wards on Hogwarts were significant, she'd felt them when they crossed the grounds, the layered, dense magic of serious protective intent, century upon century of it. He was surrounded by people who liked him, which he needed and she couldn't entirely provide. Hermione was there and Hermione was the kind of friend who would insist on doing things correctly, which Harry needed, and Ron Weasley was the kind of friend who would get into trouble with him and make it feel worthwhile, which Harry also needed. She couldn't be all of those things to him. She knew that. She had always known that, in the way she knew things about herself that she would prefer not to know but accepted because accuracy was more useful than comfort. What she could do, find him at breakfast before classes. Learn this castle faster than anyone expected. Build a network that crossed the house lines, because the social segregation of Hogwarts was, as far as she could see, a significant structural weakness that she intended to exploit for her own purposes. Keep her eyes on everything and report to him what he needed to know before he needed to know it. She could do all of that. She lay back and looked at the stone ceiling and felt the lake pressing against the glass. In the last life, she had spent years being the most feared person in the room. She had thought that was power. She understood now, had understood for a while, in the long quiet way you understand things you've had time to sit with, that it was a very specific kind of loneliness dressed up as strength. She wasn't going to do that again. Not entirely. She was going to be the most capable person in the room. She was going to be someone the room knew was there. But she was also going to be something she hadn't managed in the first 16 years, which was present, actually, genuinely present, in the specific way that lets things in. She thought about Hermione's surprised, unguarded smile. She thought about Gemma Farley saying that's the part one find interesting. She thought about Draco Malfoy and his grey eyes that kept running updated numbers on her. She thought about Harry's hand raised across the Great Hall. She thought about herself raising 2 fingers back. She closed her eyes. She slept. The lake moved outside the green glass. Tomorrow she would start learning the castle. She would find Harry at breakfast and they'd eat together and she would tell him what she'd observed at the Slytherin table and he would tell her what he'd observed at the Gryffindor table and between them they'd have a better picture of this place than anyone else their age. She had 10 days before she started moving the pieces. 10 days was plenty. Chapter 4, Lessons in Fire. She figured out Quirrell in the 3rd week of October. Not all at once. It came together the way most things came together for her. Incrementally, each piece unremarkable on its own, the picture only visible when you stepped back and let the collected data resolve into shape. A stammer that appeared and disappeared with no physiological consistency. The turban that he adjusted when he thought no one was looking, always at the back of his head, always with the faint wince of someone managing pain in a specific location. The way he moved through certain corridors differently from others, slower near the 3rd floor, quicker through the entrance hall, like a man navigating a map that existed inside his head and differed from the actual one. The smell was the final piece. She'd been close to him twice in Charms. She was near the top of the class and he sometimes wandered in to observe, though he claimed it was accidental, and she'd caught it both times. Underneath the garlic, underneath the wool and chalk and ordinary teacher smells, there was something else. Something dead and preserved and cold in the specific way that was not the cold of dungeons or autumn but the cold of a thing that had lost the right to warmth. She knew that smell. She'd stood in the Fire Nation palace and smelled it off men who had made choices that cost them their humanity, and the species of the choice didn't matter as much as the consequence, which was always the same. Something fundamental had left, and what remained was a husk running on will and rot. She told Harry at breakfast on a Thursday, speaking quietly across the table with their heads angled toward each other in the particular configuration they'd developed for sensitive conversations in public, close enough that it looked like ordinary twin proximity, far enough that they weren't whispering. "Quirrell," she said. "Something's wrong with him." Harry looked up from his eggs. His eyes went to the teacher's table, then back. "Wrong how?" "He has someone else in his head." A pause. Harry's fork went still. Are you sure?" "I'm not certain yet." "I'm close." She turned her teacup in her hands. "You know the stone Hagrid retrieved from Gringotts? The high-security vault, the package he wouldn't talk about?" Harry's expression shifted. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything." She'd also, in the weeks since term began, done enough reading about Nicholas Flamel in the restricted section. She'd walked in, made direct eye contact with the librarian, and said, "I'll be using the restricted section," with the flat certainty of someone whose authority rested entirely on the conviction that they had it, and the librarian had not stopped her, to understand what the stone probably was. "It's here. In the school. And Quirrell has been trying to get at it since before term began." Harry set his fork down entirely. "So what do we do?" "We watch. We prepare. We don't go to Dumbledore." He looked at her. "Why not?" "Because Dumbledore put the stone here. He knows someone's after it. He has made the deliberate choice to use an 11-year-old with a famous name as an additional security variable, which tells me either he trusts our ability to handle what's coming or he wants us in proximity to it for reasons he hasn't shared. She lifted her tea. Either way, we handle it ourselves. Harry processed this. She watched him run through the objections she knew he had, that adults should be told, that the appropriate response to danger was the appropriate authority, and then she watched him arrive at the same place he always arrived when he thought it through, that the appropriate authorities had, so far, made every decision about their lives without asking them, and the decisions had included a cupboard in Surrey. "Okay," he said. "What do we need to know?" "I need to get into the third-floor corridor. To understand the defenses. So that when it becomes necessary, we know what we're walking into." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not going tonight. I'm building information." He stared at her for a moment, then exhaled. "I'm going with you when you go." "I expected you would," she said. "I've already accounted for it." He picked his fork back up. After a moment, "How are you doing in Snape's class?" The subject change was not actually a subject change, it was Harry's way of segueing into something he'd been thinking about, and she let it. "Better than he'd like. He keeps giving you those looks." "Snape gives everyone looks. He's a man who communicates primarily through implication." She'd spent the first month of potions being tested. Snape had a specific interest in the Slytherin first years, as head of house, and a specific interest in her that she'd identified as something between professional suspicion and reluctant attention. He pushed her in class. He asked harder questions and then looked frustrated when she answered them and then asked harder ones, in a cycle that she found genuinely entertaining. "He'll either decide I'm worth his time or he won't. I'm not adjusting my performance either way." He took 12 points from Neville for breathing wrong. Neville was holding his cauldron wrong and the vapor was destabilizing the base solution. Snape was technically right. She paused. He delivered it badly. That's a different problem. Harry looked at her. "You're defending Snape. I'm being accurate about Snape. It's not the same thing." She drained her tea. "How's Hermione?" "Good. She and Ron had another argument about, actually I don't remember what it was about. They argue about everything." A pause, fond. "She asked about you. Said you haven't been to the library this week." "I've been using the room on the 4th floor." "What room on the 4th floor?" "The one that's been unused for 30 years because everyone forgot the door opens inward," she said. "I've been using it to practice." Harry stared at her. "Practice what?" She met his eyes. "Come and see tonight. After dinner. I'll show you." The room on the 4th floor was empty of furniture, which she appreciated, and had windows that faced north, which meant the afternoon light was consistent and non-committal, which she also appreciated. She'd cleared the dust in the first week and acquired several thick candles from the supply cupboard near the Charms classroom through the simple method of taking them when no one was looking. Harry arrived at 7 and she was already there, candles lit around the perimeter, standing in the center of the stone floor with her wand in her hand. "Close the door," she said. He did. He looked at the candles, at her, at the cleared space. "What are we practicing?" "Combat magic." "We don't learn that until," Hermione said. "That's 5th year at least." Hermione is right about what's on the curriculum. She turned to face him. "I've been reading ahead. The theory of offensive spell construction is available in the library if you know what to look for. The wand mechanics for precision casting are in the 3rd volume of Advanced Magical Theory. I've been working on the synthesis." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "Show me." She raised her wand. She looked at the candle at the far end of the room, 20 feet away. Not a simple extinguishing, she could do that in her sleep, had been doing it since September with the calm satisfaction of someone returning to a native language. This was something else. She focused on the flame, felt the magic gather in the way that had become as natural as breathing, and then she did something that the textbooks called directed elemental transfiguration but that she experienced as something much older and more personal. She called the fire. The candle flame stretched. Then it moved, traveled through the air between them with a controlled, ribbon-like grace, not chaotic, not diffuse, perfectly formed, and she brought it to hover in the air between her open palm and the floor, 3 feet off the ground, steady as a lamp. Harry looked at the floating fire. Then at her. "How?" he said. "Practice," she said. "And the theory is in the books, but the books don't tell you the important part, which is that the magic responds to certainty. If you know it will work, it works. If you believe it might work, it might. If you hope it works, you're wasting everyone's time." He stepped closer to the fire. Reached out. She let him feel the warmth of it. His face was doing the thing it did when something amazed him, completely open, all the way through, nothing held back. "Can I try?" he said. "That's why you're here." They worked for 2 hours. Harry was not as precise as her, he never would be. That particular quality of diamond-hard focus was her specific thing, and she had it because she'd paid for it in a previous life in ways she wouldn't wish on him, but he was something she found more surprising in him every time she saw it. He was fast. His magic responded to emotional engagement rather than intellectual control, which meant that once he understood what he was trying to do and connected it to something real, it happened. He didn't need to think his way to the outcome. He needed to feel his way there. She adjusted her teaching accordingly, which was not something she'd expected to do. "You're a good teacher," he said, at the end of the second hour, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his hair worse than usual from the magical static. "I'm an effective one," she said. "Those aren't always the same thing. You explained it in 4 different ways until one of them worked. That's just communication. Most people give up after one." He was looking at her with the particular quality of attention that meant he was going to say something he'd been holding. "At dinner last week, Hermione said she thought you were the most interesting person at Hogwarts." She said nothing. "I thought you should know," he said. "Because you don't always know when people are saying things about you that are good. You know when they're calculating. You know when they're threatened. But good things, you sometimes miss." She looked at him. "Hermione said that to you?" "To me and Ron, yeah." "What did Ron say?" Harry grinned. "He said, she's also terrifying." Hermione said, "Those aren't mutually exclusive." And then they agreed on something for the first time in a week, which I consider your gift to me. She turned away so he couldn't see her expression, which was doing something she didn't have complete control over. "We should work on shielding next time," she said. "The theory's more complex but the application is more immediately useful." "Aza." "What?" "You're allowed to like that," she said that. She was quiet for a moment. The candles burned their steady, even light around them. The fire she'd called had long since returned to its wick. "I know," she said finally, which was as far as she was going. November brought the troll. She found out about it the way she found out about most things, before anyone told her, through the information she collected in the corridors, the overheard conversation between 2 prefects about something that had gotten in during the Halloween feast, the frantic quality of the teachers moving through the hall with their wands out. She was already moving toward the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor when she calculated the trajectory. A 12-foot mountain troll loose in the dungeons meant it was moving through the castle, and the castle's layout sent anything coming from the Slytherin corridor past 2 key junctions, one of which was near the 2nd floor bathroom. And Hermione had not been at the feast because Ron had said something stupid at lunch and she'd been crying in the bathroom since the afternoon. She knew this because Harry had told her and Harry had told her because he'd felt guilty about it all through the feast, which told her it was at least partially his fault too, which told her Ron had said what he'd said with some audience validation and Harry had provided it. She ran. The corridor to the bathroom had the smell before she turned the corner, wet stone and animal musk and something darker underneath it, the biological announcement of something that operated on pure destructive instinct. She came around the corner at speed and went still. The troll was already in the bathroom. The wall was partially demolished. She could hear it from where she stood, the sound of stone being broken against stone, the particular rhythm of something causing destruction without a plan. She went in. The troll was facing away from her, which was the only piece of luck she needed, and she took it without gratitude because luck was a resource, not a relationship. Hermione was pressed into the far corner, frozen in the way of someone whose brain has short-circuited between screaming options and landed on stillness. She was not hurt. She was not going to be hurt. Azula looked at the troll and conducted a rapid assessment, 12 feet, 400 stone at least, club the size of a young tree, movement speed limited by mass. It had good instincts and no strategy. She had strategy and a wand she hadn't had time to fully explore yet. Fine. She raised her wand. She felt the magic gather, not slowly, not the measured accumulation of someone who was still learning the mechanism, fast, the way fire came to her in her first life, the way the Thunderbird feather recognized her absolute certainty and met it with its own. She sent a wide-area concussive force into the back of the troll's knees. It was not a spell she'd been taught. It was not a spell in the first-year curriculum. It was a spell she developed in the fourth-floor room by reading the theory of kinetic magical transference and applying it to a structural problem, and it worked the way her spells always worked, exactly as intended. The troll's knees buckled. It didn't fall, but it staggered, and the stagger brought its head down, and she hit it in the head with the blunt force variant of the same spell, twice, fast, like someone driving nails. The troll sat down. It didn't go unconscious. She hadn't had enough power behind the second hit, but it sat down and looked confused, which was more than enough time. Hermione, she said, not loudly, not soft. Move. Left. Toward the door. Hermione moved. Her legs were shaking but they held. She kept her eyes on Azula the entire time she crossed the bathroom, which Azula found sensible. The troll was starting to get up. She hit it once more, this time she brought something extra into it, something from a deeper place that felt older than either of her lives, something that had the smell and temperature of a fire that has made its decision, and the troll went down fully, club rolling away across the wet floor. The door burst open. Harry came in, breathing hard, with Ron behind him. Harry took in the scene in 1 second flat, troll on the floor, Hermione against the wall, Azula standing between them with her wand up and her expression completely even, and his face went through relief and then a complicated emotion that landed on something she didn't have a clean category for. Ron looked at the unconscious troll. He looked at Azula. He looked at the troll again. "Blimey," he said. "What did you do to it?" "Dropped it," she said. She lowered her wand. Harry crossed to Hermione, who grabbed his arm with both hands in the way of someone who has been very scared and is now dealing with the physical evidence of it. He said something to her quietly and she nodded, and Azula watched the transfer of okayness happen between them, Harry's particular gift, this capacity to make people feel attended to. Ron was still looking at the troll. He looked like he was revising a document in his head. "I thought, Harry and I were coming to find her," Ron said to Azula. He was working it out as he said it. "We heard about the troll in the dungeons and Harry said she was in the bathroom and we ran, but I got here first," she said. "How did you know she was in here?" "Harry mentioned it at breakfast." She looked at Harry. "You'd been worried about her all through the feast." Harry's expression was complicated. "You came for her because I was worried." "I came for her because she was in a building with a troll and I knew where she was," Azula said. "Don't read more into it than that." Hermione, from behind Harry's arm, made a sound that was very close to a laugh. Her eyes were bright and still slightly wet and she was looking at Azula the way she'd looked at her in the train compartment, but with additional layers. "Thank you," Hermione said. Azula put her wand back. "We need to be out of here before the teachers arrive," she said. "Hermione, can you walk?" "Yes." "Then walk." They were in the corridor and moving before the sound of teacher footsteps reached the far end of the hall. Snape had been in the third-floor corridor that same night. She knew because she'd smelled him there, or smelled the absence of him, the specific displaced air of someone who had recently occupied a space and left. When she went to look, 3 days later, at 3 in the morning. She did her best thinking at 3 in the morning, and she moved through the castle in those hours with the ease of someone who had memorized its rhythms the way you memorize a person's breathing. She'd found the corridor. She'd found the locked door and felt the magic behind it, layered, sequential, different signatures, different hands. She'd felt the large sleeping presence beyond the first door and identified it as a dog from the smell and the sound of the breathing. 3 heads. She'd noted this without visible reaction and moved on to the nature of the enchantments behind it, as far as she could read through a locked door, which was further than most people could read at all. She'd also found Snape's footprints, metaphorically speaking. The specific pattern of someone who had been to the door and turned back. And the other pattern, the slightly different weight, the slightly different timing, the evidence of someone who had gone in. Quirrell. Twice. She sat in the 4th floor room the next morning and ran the numbers. Quirrell had been in, both times. Quirrell had come back out, both times. Whatever was in there, the defenses were holding. Whoever had set them up had done it well. She did a mapping exercise on the floor with chalk she'd taken from the charms room, a rough layout of what she knew, the obstacle course she could infer from the enchantment signatures, the sequence she expected. She was good at this: spatial reasoning, tactical geometry, the particular chess game quality of designing or anticipating a multi-stage problem. She was still working when Harry arrived. He looked at the map on the floor and sat down cross-legged and looked at it without speaking, reading it. 7 obstacles, she said. You counted? I estimated. There are at least 5 distinct enchantment signatures. 2 of the gaps I've inferred from the theory of layered defense construction. She handed him the chalk. What am I missing? He looked at the map for a long moment. This was something she'd learned about him over months of working together. Harry was not linear, he was lateral, and he sometimes saw the thing she'd built past. He picked up the chalk and added something to the far right section. There'll be something personal, he said. From Dumbledore himself. Not just a puzzle. Something that requires judgment. Rather than cleverness. She looked at what he'd added. A shape that wasn't a puzzle piece but a moment. He'd drawn it as an open space, a decision point. Why? She said. Because Dumbledore is that kind of person. He wants to see what you do when the answer isn't obvious. He put the chalk down. I've thought about it. He didn't set this up to stop Voldemort. He set it up to see who was committed enough to get through. She looked at the map. She looked at Harry. When did you start thinking like that? She said. He shrugged. I've always thought like that. I just usually let you say it first. She returned to the map. She made a small amendment to the 4th obstacle. He might also have something that responds to love, she said, without looking up. A mirror or a seeing object. Something that shows you what you truly want versus what you should take. That's the kind of test Dumbledore would set. Harry was quiet for a moment. What do you truly want? She kept her eyes on the map. That's not a question I answer out loud. Even to me. She looked up. He was watching her with those green eyes that saw everything, and she thought about the fact that what she truly wanted was functionally in front of her and had been since they were 15 months old in a crib, and she'd let him find her hand. Especially to you, she said. Because you'd feel responsible for it. He held her gaze. He didn't push. That was the other thing she'd learned about Harry that she hadn't expected to learn: he knew when to stop. He'd learned the shape of the doors she kept closed, and he honored them without making her feel like a house full of locked rooms. Okay, he said. He looked at the map. We should tell Hermione. I know. She'll freak out about the restricted section. She'll get over it. Then she'll want to help. That's why we're telling her, Azula said. December arrived and the castle went cold in a way that made her feel, for the first time since the crib, something close to homesick. Not for Privet Drive. For a heat that this world didn't have in the same way, the particular bright fierce warmth of a place built around fire as a principle rather than fire as a utility. She missed it the way you miss something that was part of you before it was part of your life. She dealt with it by working harder, which was her solution to most emotional states that she hadn't found a better answer for. She had also, in the past 3 months, done what she told Harry she would do. She had not taken over the Slytherin common room in 10 days, she had taken 12, which she counted as a conservative estimate vindicated by outcome rather than a failure. The distinction was that she hadn't sought hierarchy, she'd sought understanding, and hierarchy had resulted from it. Gemma Farley had become something adjacent to an ally. Draco had stopped performing at her and started talking to her, which was a meaningful shift. He was sharp and funny when he wasn't performing, and she found his company useful and occasionally, against her better judgment, enjoyable. The boy at the end of the table who read during dinner turned out to be called Theo Knott, and he had a quality of observation that matched hers closely enough that they'd arrived at a functional détente built on mutual acknowledgement and limited disclosure. She'd also, carefully, built connections across the house lines in the way that Hogwarts's social architecture actively discouraged. Hermione, obviously, that one had been established since the train and had deepened through study sessions and the troll incident and the particular shared chemistry of two people who think fast and differently and push each other without meaning to. She'd found 2 Ravenclaws from her year, a girl called Padma Patil and a quiet boy called Terry Boot, whose company she kept in the library. She did not have many friends. She had people she found useful and people she found real and several who were both, and she was learning, slowly, imperfectly, against the strong current of every habit she'd built in her previous life, that both categories were allowed to matter. Quirrell came to a head just before the Christmas holiday. She'd been watching the corridor for 2 weeks with the focused patience of someone who knows the thing they're watching is going to move and just needs to be present when it does. She'd asked Harry to tell her if he ever felt, she'd struggled for the word. Pushed, she'd finally said. If anything makes you feel pushed toward that corridor. 3 days before Christmas, Harry touched his scar and looked at her. She was out of her seat before she'd consciously made the decision. They went together, which she'd expected and prepared for. What she hadn't prepared for, not entirely, was the thing she felt when they descended, the specific wrongness of it, not just Quirrell's particular dead and preserved cold but something older and darker and more knowing underneath it, the way the air in the corridor felt like it was being watched by something that had very strong opinions about both of them specifically. She'd been dead once. She recognized the quality of something that treated death as a room it had already been in. They went through the obstacles. The dog she handled, she didn't use music, she used something else, a specific focus projection that she'd used once in the Fire Nation on a Komodo rhino and that worked on any animal with enough brain to be tired, the simple, direct communication that what it was guarding could rest now, that the rest could have it, that sleep was allowed. The dog's 3 heads went down in sequence. The devil's snare she identified by species and responded with light, pure, steady, conjured from the end of her wand in a beam that wasn't fire but was fire adjacent, bright enough to make the plant reconsider its grip. Harry was through before the tendrils regrouped. The keys were Harry's moment, he had the spatial instinct and the aerial awareness, and she held the door and felt the enchantments of the room and let him do what he was built for, and he found the right key in under 2 minutes with the focused joy of someone doing something their body was made for. The chess game she played. She played it fast and without sentiment, which Harry watched with a complicated expression because the pieces were large and the violence of a magical chess game was real and she did not hesitate once. She did not sacrifice Harry. She used herself once, as a calculated trade for a position she needed, and the stone floor was cold when she landed. Azza, I'm fine. She was on her feet. Go. The troll in the next chamber was already unconscious, that one hadn't been her. Someone had been through before them. She noted it and moved through, and when they reached the final door she put her hand on Harry's arm. Flames, she said. Black fire and purple fire. Logic problem. Go through the purple after you solve it. She looked at him. I could solve it. But I want you on the other side of this with me. He looked at her. Then he looked at the door. She could see him running it, the distance between them, Hermione's face when she'd asked them to come back, the mirror she predicted and been right about. Together, then, he said. She solved the bottles in under a minute, because it was a logic problem with a finite solution space and her brain treated those as insults disguised as challenges. They went through the black fire one after the other, it was cold, colder than regular fire, the chill of negated magic, and then the purple, and then they were through. The mirror was there. She'd predicted it. She looked at it and felt the mirror look back, and she did what she'd done with every other thing in both her lives that had tried to tell her what she wanted, she acknowledged the information, noted it, and kept walking. Harry saw something different in it. She didn't ask what. It wasn't her territory. Quirrell was there. He was standing in front of the mirror with his back to them, and the thing that occupied the back of his skull was already aware they'd arrived, she could feel it, the way cold air comes under a door before you open it. 2 Potters, Quirrell said, turning. His stammer was gone. The thing wearing his voice had no use for it. How unexpected. And yet, his eyes went to her. Not entirely. Where's the stone? Harry said. Quirrell's face did something that was not quite a smile. He gestured at the mirror. The child wants to know about the stone. Children always want to know about the stone. He tilted his head. One of you will be able to take it from the mirror. I've been unable to. His eyes moved to Harry. You, yes. It was designed with you in mind. Designed by who? She said. The temperature in the room dropped. The back of Quirrell's head spoke. Not through his mouth. Directly. The voice came from the back of his skull and filled the room, and it was the most unpleasant sound she had experienced in 2 lifetimes, not loud, not brutal, but wrong, the wrongness of a voice that has decided it is categorically more important than the space it occupies. By me, said what remained of Voldemort. The stone responds to those who want it found but do not want to use it. Dumbledore was very clever. A pause. I have been trying to find a host clever enough to circumvent that. I have failed so far. The voice shifted toward her. You, girl. I know what you are. You know what I was, she said. That's different. A pause. Longer than she expected. Remarkable, the voice said. You have died before. Yes. And you are not afraid of me. You're a parasite on the back of a man who deserved better than you, she said. I've been afraid of more impressive things. The silence that followed was the silence of something that had not been spoken to that way in a very long time and was running the calculation of what it meant. Harry moved. She'd known he would, he was Harry, and Harry moved when it mattered, always, without a hesitation she'd ever witnessed. And she was already covering him when he reached the mirror, and she felt the stone appear in his pocket from 20 feet away because her magical awareness was tuned to this room like a wire pulled tight. Quirrell came for him and she went between them. She did not use the wand. She reached into the thing that had never entirely gone away across 2 lives and 2 deaths and 1 reincarnation, the specific quality of her that her father had called perfection and she now understood was simply hers, and she put her hand on Quirrell's face. The fire was internal. It didn't show. But it ran from her palm into whatever Quirrell was now, and the difference between her fire and regular fire was the same difference as the difference between a blade and a hammer. One was indiscriminate, one was precise, and hers had always been precise. Quirrell screamed. The room went white. The dark thing tore itself out of Quirrell's body in a visible convulsion, and she felt it pass through her, not around, through, like a wind going through an open door, and she was cold for 2 seconds, the specific dead cold, and then it was gone and the room was warm again and Quirrell was on the floor and the dark thing was in the air, formless, searching, and then it was simply not. She stood up straight. She turned to Harry. He was looking at her with both hands at his sides and his face open all the way down, the way it got when something bypassed all his filters and hit him directly. Are you hurt? She said. He shook his head slowly. Are you? She ran the internal check. No. What was that? He said. What did you, your hand, later, she said. She crossed to Quirrell and checked his pulse, alive, barely, and whatever had been riding him was gone, the dead and preserved smell already dissipating. She looked at Harry. We need to get out of here and then we need to be very clear about what we saw. Which is, Quirrell tried to steal the stone, he couldn't get it from the mirror, and his accomplice fled when prevented. Harry looked at her. And your hand? I caught him off guard, she said. The details don't need to be precise. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him deciding. He always decided in her favor, which was something she had never asked for and did not take for granted. Okay, he said. Let's go. They walked out together, through the obstacles, back through the fire, up through the stone and the cold and the dark, toward the castle and the warmth and the distance between a Slytherin dungeon and a Gryffindor tower that was not, she had learned, as wide as it looked from the outside. Behind them, the mirror of Eriste stood empty in a lit room, reflecting nothing. Above them, Dumbledore's office light was on. She noted both. Filed them. Walked on. Chapter 5, The Wizengamot convenes. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late July, 3 weeks into the summer holiday. It came by Ministry Owl, not Hedwig, not any of the ordinary post, a grey bird with an officiousness to its posture that suggested it had been specifically selected for delivering bad news. It landed on the kitchen table at Privet Drive while Azula was eating toast and dropped a sealed envelope in front of her with the gravity of a court summons. Because it was a court summons. She picked it up. Read it once. Set it down and finished her toast. Harry came downstairs 20 minutes later, found her at the table with the letter open in front of her and her second cup of tea, and sat down across from her with the expression he wore when he could already tell something had happened. What is it? She slid it across the table. He read it. His face went through several stages, confusion, then a specific kind of anger that was quiet and hot, the kind he reserved for things that were genuinely unfair rather than just difficult. They're summoning you to the Wizengamot. Yes. 4. It says unregistered magical activity of a concerning nature and conduct unbecoming a minor witch. That's, he looked up. That's what you did to Quirrell. Among other things. She took the letter back. The third floor incident was witnessed. I've been on their list since November. She turned the envelope over. The seal was Ministry purple, the Wizengamot stamp embossed in gold. Heavy. Self-important. They've been building a file. Dumbledore. Not directly. But he's the chief warlock. He chairs the session. She set it down. He's been patient about it. I'll give him that. He waited until term ended so it wouldn't disrupt exams. Harry stood up. The chair scraped back. We can refuse. We can't. They have no jurisdiction over, you're 11. You're 12 in 2 weeks. They can't just, they can, she said. The Wizengamot has jurisdiction over all magical activity in Britain, including activity performed by minors. The relevant statute is the Decree for the Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery. She had read this statute in March when she'd known this was coming. She had read the accompanying case law, the precedents, the historical record of Wizengamot proceedings involving minors, and the documented outcomes of those proceedings. She had been thorough. They have the authority. Harry looked at her. He was doing the thing where he was angry on her behalf and trying to find somewhere to put it that wasn't directly at her. What do they want? To assess me, she said. That's the formal language. What they actually want is to determine whether I'm a threat and, if so, what kind of cage fits best. She looked at the letter again. Dumbledore wants me separated from you. Not permanently, he's not stupid enough to think that's achievable or even desirable. But long enough to examine me without you in the room. Long enough to take a measure. They won't separate you from me. They'll try. She folded the letter. And they'll fail. But I want to know the mechanism of the attempt before it happens. Harry sat back down. He put both his forearms on the table, leaning forward, and looked at her with the particular intensity he deployed when something mattered enough to bring all of himself to it. What do you need? The Gringotts documents arrived last month, she said. The estate settlement records. I've read them. I know. You didn't tell me everything in them. I'm telling you now. She poured more tea. Our family's financial accounts have been administered since our parents' deaths by a trust overseen by the ministry, with Dumbledore named as secondary advisor. The management of those accounts has included several disbursements I can't account for, to what the documents list as protective arrangement overhead. That's a category that has no legal definition in wizarding estate law. Harry stared at her. He took money from our parents' estate. I don't know that yet. I know there are disbursements I can't trace. I know that the Gringotts goblins have been flagging the same irregularity for 9 years and receiving no response. She looked at him. I'm going to the Wizengamot hearing, Harry. And I'm going to walk in knowing more about Albus Dumbledore's relationship with our family's affairs than he knows I know. A pause. Harry's jaw was doing the tight thing. And if they try to take your wand they won't take my wand, she said, very quietly, very certainly. Not while I'm holding it. The quality of the silence that followed was not fear. It was the recognition, which Harry had been accumulating since they were infants, of what she was. He knew her better than anyone alive in either world, and he looked at her now with eyes that held no surprise and no apprehension and nothing but a very focused, very clear, okay. Then let's do this correctly. I'm coming with you, he said. I expected you would, she said. I've already accounted for it. They took the flow from the leaky cauldron on the morning of the hearing, which Azula had never used before and found deeply unpleasant. The fire was wrong, too cold, too mechanical, nothing like real fire, and arrived in the Ministry of Magic atrium at 9:45, 15 minutes before the session was scheduled to open. The Ministry atrium was built to impress, which told her it was built by people who needed to impress, which told her something about the nature of the institution it housed. Tall and gilded and full of moving memos and busy officials and the particular atmosphere of an organization that had developed its own gravity. The fountain in the center featured a group of magical creatures looking up at a witch and wizard with the exact adoring deference of a propaganda piece, which she noted and stored. She was wearing her robes. She had not worn anything designed to diminish. She was 12 years old in 2 weeks and she was wearing school robes that were impeccably pressed and her wand was in her hand because she had decided before they left that she was not putting it away. Harry was beside her in his own robes, with Hedwig's absence noted because Hedwig was home and this wasn't a social visit. He had also, she noticed, done something with his hair that had not improved it but represented effort, which she found touching and did not comment on. They were met at the security desk by a ministry official who had the energy of a man who had been given a task he found uncomfortable but was going to perform it professionally. He checked their names on a list. He looked at her wand. You'll need to put that away, Miss Potter, he said. Wands are to be stowed upon entry. I'll keep it, she said pleasantly. He looked at his list. Then at her. The list again. It's standard procedure. The standard procedure applies to visitors, she said. I am a respondent, which is a different classification. Section 42 of the Wizengamot Procedure Charter. She had read the charter. The official had not been expecting that. Additionally, the decree for reasonable restriction of underage sorcery only restricts use outside school, not possession. My wand stays. A long pause. The official looked at Harry, who was watching Azula with barely concealed delight. He looked back at her. He made the calculation of what would happen if he tried to physically take the wand from a girl who was holding it the way she was holding it, which was with the absolute relaxed certainty of someone who has already decided the outcome. Right, he said. This way. They went down. The lifts were rattling and ornate and full of memos dive-bombing each other, which she found either charming or ominous depending on how you felt about administrative systems that had developed their own ecology. She found it ominous. Harry found it charming. These were consistent responses. The courtrooms were in the lower levels, where the ministry kept its serious business and its most performative architecture. Courtroom 10 was at the end of a long corridor and the door was old wood, dark and heavy, and through it she could hear the murmur of people already seated and the quality of collective waiting. She stopped outside the door. Harry looked at her. Ready? She was examining her own internal state the way she'd done since she was old enough to conduct internal examinations, methodically, without sentimentality, looking for cracks or hesitations or the spots where emotion was loading more weight than structure could handle. She found the usual inventory, controlled, clear, the low-level warmth that she now recognized as her version of anticipation and had stopped trying to identify as something cooler. Yes, she said. They're going to try to make you small, he said. They're going to use the room and the age thing and the number of them versus one of you. I know. You're not small. She looked at him. He said it the way he said most true things, simply, directly, as though it had never occurred to him that the truth should be delivered with more ceremony. I know, she said again. Come on. She pushed the door open and walked in. The Wizengamot chamber was built like the inside of a bowl, the Wizengamot members in tiered semicircular rows looking down at a central space where a single chair sat with chains attached to its arms, and she registered the chains and filed them under theater because they were theater, a visual communication of power that required you to accept the communication to be affected by it. She looked at the chair and decided not to sit in it. There were 50 or so Wizengamot members in their plum-colored robes, a sea of judicial authority organized by seniority and institutional comfort. She scanned them in the time it took to walk to the center of the room, faces, ages, postures, the ones who were looking at her with professional neutrality and the ones who were looking at her with something else. She counted 11 whose expressions told her they'd already decided. 4 who were uncertain. The rest were unreadable or indifferent. Dumbledore was in the Chief Warlock's chair at the top of the central row. He was wearing dark robes and the half-moon glasses and he looked at her over them with those brilliant blue eyes that were doing the same reading they'd done at the start of term feast. She looked back and did not look away first. Beside him, in a chair slightly lower and slightly to the right, was a woman Azula had not seen before and immediately disliked on principle, pink robes, a face like someone had designed it to look pleasant and gotten only most of the way there, a smile that was wide and showed teeth and had nothing whatsoever behind it. She had a clipboard and a pink quill and the air of someone who had memorized the rules in order to weaponize them. Miss Potter, Dumbledore said. His voice was warm and measured and filled the chamber without appearing to try. Thank you for attending. I didn't have a choice, she said. Your letter made that clear. A small, very controlled expression crossed his face. Not displeasure, something more complex. Please, sit. She looked at the chair. The chains lay still. She looked back at Dumbledore. I'm comfortable standing, she said. Silence. The 50 Wizengamot members adjusted. She heard it in them, the small collective shift of people recalibrating the room because the variable in the center of it had declined to follow the expected choreography. The woman in the pink robes leaned forward. The respondent is required to be seated during. The respondent is 12 years old and has not been found guilty of anything, Azula said, without heat. The seating requirement applies to defendants in criminal trials. This is listed as an assessment hearing. I've read the charter. She looked at the woman. You are. A pause. The smile tightened. Senior Undersecretary to the Minister, Dolores Umbridge. I see. She looked at Umbridge for another second, long enough to convey the completion of an assessment, then looked back at the chamber. Shall we begin? Dumbledore, to his credit, proceeded. He had a long-game quality, she was noticing, the kind of patience that came from genuine confidence, not anxiety. He wasn't rattled by her refusal to sit. He was interested by it, in the careful way of someone cataloging data for use later. The hearing is called to address several incidents during Miss Azalea Potter's first year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Dumbledore said. Specifically, the use of non-standard magic in the third-floor corridor on the night of the 30th of November, the use of magic against a Ministry-classified creature during the Halloween incident, and the use of unregistered, advanced magical techniques in the lower chambers of Hogwarts on the 14th of June. I'd also add, Umbridge said, her voice sweet and soft and sharp underneath, the ongoing pattern of non-curriculum magical development, including spells developed without instruction or approval from qualified, I'd like to know, Azula interrupted, who filed the complaint. Umbridge blinked. The Wizengamot initiated this hearing in response to, the Wizengamot responds to complaints. It doesn't generate them independently. She looked around the chamber. Which member filed the initial complaint? That's a matter of public record per Section 17 of the Judicial Procedure Charter. A beat of silence. Then, from the third row, a man with silver blonde hair and a face she recognized as 30 years of Draco's future, and a cane with a silver snakehead handle, who said, the complaint was filed jointly by myself and two other members, representing concern for the safety of students exposed to unsupervised advanced magic. Lucius Malfoy. She'd expected him. She'd done her reading. Mr. Malfoy, she said. How many of the students allegedly exposed to my unsupervised magic were harmed? A pause. That's not the relevant, it seems relevant to a safety concern, she said. How many? Silence. None, she said. Because the incidents cited were protective in nature. The Halloween incident involved a 12-foot mountain troll in a closed bathroom with a student inside. The third-floor incident involved unauthorized access to a secure area that I was not the unauthorized party in. And the June incident, she looked at Dumbledore, involved the interruption of an attempt to steal a powerful magical artifact from within the school's own protections. The chamber murmured. She let it murmur. The question I have for this body, she continued, is straightforward. You are assessing me. The specific concern is that I am a child performing magic beyond my age and training without supervision or approval. She looked around the room. But the magic I performed was in service of exactly the values this institution claims to uphold: protection of students, defense of the school, prevention of theft by a servant of Voldemort. The room flinched. Half the chamber. The physical recoil from a name. She had used it deliberately. She watched the flinch move through the room and noted who flinched and who didn't. Lucius Malfoy had not flinched. Dumbledore had not flinched. Umbridge had reacted with something other than fear, calculation, the look of someone noting a useful data point. And this body's response is to summon me to a hearing rather than to ask what I found in those chambers and how. She looked at Dumbledore. I find that interesting. Dumbledore looked at her over his glasses. His blue eyes were doing the complex reading, the deep scan. He let a moment pass that was precisely long enough to signal that he was taking her seriously. We are asking now, he said. What did you find in those chambers, Miss Potter? She had been prepared for this. She had also been prepared for the possibility that the hearing would go well and the possibility that it wouldn't, and she'd built a decision tree accordingly. She looked at Dumbledore, who was looking at her with the intelligence and the patience and the certainty that he was right that she'd identified and been wary of since she understood what he was. I found, she said, that the stone was never adequately protected. The obstacles were sophisticated but finite, and a determined adult with the right knowledge could breach all of them. What actually stopped the theft wasn't the protections. She paused. It was us. 2 12-year-olds. Which was, I suspect, the point. Silence. Very complete. The protections were designed to be beatable, she said. By someone with specific intentions. You wanted whoever came for it to get through most of the way, so that you'd know who was coming and how. The final obstacle, the mirror, was the actual lock, because it could only be operated by someone who didn't want to use what they found. She looked at Dumbledore steadily. That's a very elegant design. It's also a design that assumes children will enter it and treats that assumption as acceptable collateral. Dumbledore was very still. You used us, she said. Not with anger. With precision. Not maliciously. But you put a heavily defended object in a school full of children, gave the man who was after it access to those children all year, and counted on the fact that Harry would eventually be drawn toward it and would have the right quality of heart to operate the mirror. She tilted her head. It worked. But I'd like you to acknowledge, in front of this body, that it was a deliberate choice and not an unforeseen circumstance. The chamber was absolutely silent now. 50 plum-robed members of the Wizengamot were looking at a 12-year-old girl who was looking at Albus Dumbledore, and the specific quality of that attention had changed from the judicial assessment of a minor to something else entirely. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. In those eyes, behind the brilliance and the patience, she saw something she hadn't expected to find there. She saw impressed, running alongside the complex machinery of someone recalculating a very long-term plan. You are perceptive, he said, with a quality of acknowledgement that she suspected he gave very rarely. I try to be accurate, she said. May I ask, he paused, the pause itself deliberate. How long have you known? That you placed us there as a variable. Since November. She held his gaze. The disbursements from our parents' estate were a secondary curiosity. I mention them because they're on the record at Gringotts and you should be aware that I've seen them. The silence shifted. She heard it change quality, the specific silence of people who have just heard something they hadn't known was in the room. Lucius Malfoy had gone very still in the third row. Umbridge Squill had stopped moving. Dumbledore's expression was controlled, careful, the face of someone who has just discovered that the board they're playing on extends further than they'd measured. Those records, he said, slowly, relate to complex arrangements made in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. I'm sure they do, she said. I'm not making an accusation. I'm noting the existence of documentation that this body may wish to be aware of, given that this hearing concerns the management of my affairs and my brother's affairs by the institution you represent. She looked around the chamber. I am 12 years old. I have no legal standing in this room on my own behalf. But the Gringotts records belong to the Potter estate, and the Potter estate has beneficiaries who will be of legal age in 6 years. I thought it was worth mentioning. Umbridge said, her voice going slightly strained at its pleasant edges, this hearing concerns your magical conduct, not financial records. This hearing concerns me, Azula said. All of this concerns me. I'm here. She looked at the woman directly. You're welcome to limit the scope of what you're willing to discuss. But you can't limit what I know. Harry, from the bench at the side of the room where respondents' supporters were permitted to sit, made a very small sound. She didn't look at him. But she felt him. Dumbledore spoke. His voice had not changed, it remained warm, measured, the voice of a man who has decided that the ground is shifting and the correct response is to remain on it rather than scrambling. Perhaps, he said, we might move to the question of what this body intends to do going forward. I'd like to propose something, Azula said. He looked at her. The hint of something, not quite amusement, not quite caution. Both. Please. She had prepared this part carefully. She had drafted it in the fourth-floor room in the last weeks of term, revised it, thrown out the version that was too aggressive, kept the one that was precise. She'd run it by Hermione, who had made 4 suggestions, 3 of which she'd incorporated. She had not told Harry the specifics because Harry had a tendency to look at her when she made arguments and his looking at her was a variable she couldn't account for. I propose a supervised independent study arrangement, she said. Formal, documented, filed with the ministry and the school. I continue at Hogwarts on standard curriculum. I additionally pursue independent magical development under the supervision of a qualified adult of my choosing and the ministry's countersignature. My magical conduct is logged quarterly and reviewed by this body. She paused. In exchange, this hearing concludes without finding, and the ministry formally acknowledges in writing that the incidents cited were protective in nature and have been noted as such. Silence. You're proposing, Umbridge said slowly, that we give you unsupervised, that is, independently supervised. I'm proposing that you give me a legal framework for what I'm already doing, she said. Which is the difference between a situation you can document and one you can't. I would think, she added, pleasantly, that the ministry would prefer documentation. She let that sit. She let them look at each other. She let the mathematics of the situation do what mathematics always did when given enough time, resolve in favor of the person who had set it up correctly. It was Dumbledore who spoke first. The supervisory arrangement, he said. Who did you have in mind? Professor McGonagall, she said. She's been overseeing my extended work since February. She's aware of the proposal. McGonagall had, in fact, been aware of it since May. She'd sat in her office on a Thursday afternoon and listened to Azula lay out the framework, and then she'd taken off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose and said, in the tone of someone who has decided to choose precision over preference, "This is the most reasonable thing a student has said to me in 30 years, which I find extremely alarming." Azula had said, "Will you do it?" McGonagall had looked at her for a long time. "Yes," she'd said. "I will." Dumbledore looked at the chamber. The chamber looked at Dumbledore. Lucius Malfoy's face was doing something she couldn't fully read, not the decision Dumbledore would make, because Malfoy's assessment of the landscape had already shifted. She could see it in the quality of his stillness, the calculation running behind those pale eyes. She was not, she noted, going to be a simple problem for him either. She'd have to watch that. "I would suggest a 10-minute recess," Dumbledore said, "to allow the body to confer." She nodded. She walked back to the side bench and sat next to Harry, and he turned to look at her with an expression she had no efficient category for because it was too much things at once: pride, relief, something else that was quieter and older than either of those. "McGonagall," he said. She agreed in May. "You've been planning this since May." "March, technically. May is when I had all the components." He looked at the chamber, where the 50 plum-robed members were doing their conferring. He looked at Dumbledore, who was speaking quietly to Umbridge with his hands folded in his lap and his expression unreadable. He looked back at her. "The estate documents," he said. "You mentioned them on purpose." "Yes. Even though you're not making an accusation." "Because the mention itself does the work," she said. "I don't need to accuse him of anything. I need him to understand that I have the information and I've read it and I know what it means and I'm watching." She paused. "He's not a villain. I want to be clear about that. He makes decisions he believes are correct and they cost other people things he doesn't fully account for. That's more dangerous than a villain in some ways because it's harder to argue with." Harry was quiet for a moment. "He put us in Privet Drive." "Yes. Because of love magic in our mother's blood. Protection." "Yes. It was also," she said, carefully, "the arrangement that kept us isolated from the wizarding world for a decade, which meant that when we arrived as unknowns. And an unknown Harry is a Harry that can be shaped." She looked at the chamber. "He didn't plan it that way." "I don't think he did. But the outcome served him, so he didn't question it." Harry sat with this. He had the quality of someone who is sitting with something genuinely difficult, turning it without flinching, because Harry did not flinch from things that were true even when they were about people he wanted to feel uncomplicated about. "What do we do?" he said. "We be ungovernable," she said. Politely. He almost smiled. "That's your answer for everything. It's worked so far." The chamber was reconvening. She stood. The vote took 4 minutes. 31 in favor of the proposed arrangement, 12 against, 7 abstentions. The formal language was recorded. The finding of no adverse conduct was entered. The independent study framework was approved, pending McGonagall's co-signature, which would be on file by September. Umbridge, recording the outcome on her clipboard, pressed the pink quill to the parchment with a fineness of expression that suggested she was imagining it was something other than parchment. Azula noted this with the calm certainty of someone who knows they have just made an enemy who will be patient about it. That was fine. She had dealt with patient enemies before. Lucius Malfoy left without speaking to her, but on his way out through the side door he paused for approximately 1 second in her peripheral vision. She didn't turn. He walked on. She filed the pause. Dumbledore descended from the Chief Warlock's chair after the chamber cleared and crossed the floor to where she and Harry were gathering their things. He moved the way old things with deep roots move, unhurried, sure of the ground. "Miss Potter," he said. He looked at Harry too. "Harry." "Professor," Harry said, with the particular tone he used for people he was trying to be fair to. Dumbledore looked at Azala. "You argued well." "I argued accurately," she said. "The distinction matters." "Indeed it does." He looked at her in the careful, deep-reading way that she had stopped finding unsettling because she'd decided it was simply his operating mode, and learning to be comfortable with someone's operating mode was more efficient than being unsettled by it. "I owe you an apology," he said. She had not expected that. She kept her expression even. "For what, specifically?" "For several things. The arrangement in Surrey was," he paused. The pause had something genuine in it. "It was the best solution I could find in a very short time, with very limited options, under very great pressure. It was not, I think, adequate." She looked at him. She was looking for the manipulation in this, the apology as strategy, the warmth as tool. She found something more complicated. The apology was real and the calculation was also real, and they were coexisting in the same man without apparent contradiction, which was something she understood because she had her own relationship with that particular coexistence. "It wasn't adequate," she agreed. "We're noting it and moving forward." Something moved in his blue eyes. "You sound like your mother." "People keep saying that," she said. "I take it as accurate data." Dumbledore looked at Harry, who was watching this exchange with the focused attention he brought to things that mattered, filing every word. "I would like," Dumbledore said, to both of them, "to speak with you more. Not as Chief Warlock. As your headmaster, and as someone who was very fond of your parents." A pause. "I think I have been, perhaps, too fond of distance. It has led to incomplete pictures." She heard what he wasn't saying, which was, "You showed me a gap in my information today and I am acknowledging it." She heard what he also wasn't saying, which was that the acknowledgement didn't mean he was done planning or that his confidence in his own judgment had fundamentally shifted. He was still going to do things his way. He was just going to do them with updated data on her. She could work with that. "We'd like that," Harry said. He glanced at her. She gave him the small nod. "Starting next year. We'd like to know more about our parents." Dumbledore's face did something that she suspected was involuntary, a warmth that came from somewhere real and old and not currently serving any function except being true. "I'd like that very much," he said. He left. The door closed. The chamber was empty around them, all the plum-robed authority gone, just the two of them in the old wood and stone. Harry looked at her. She picked up her bag. She was already thinking about the chain of consequences from this morning: Lucius Malfoy, who would recalibrate, Umbridge, who would remember, Dumbledore, who would plan differently, the Wizengamot members who had voted against her, whose names she had memorized. She was thinking about second year, which was coming in 6 weeks, and the things she'd read over the summer that suggested the coming year would not be quieter than the last. She was also thinking, smaller and quieter, about the fact that the room had been full of 50 adults in authority and not one of them had made her feel small. She had not let them. "Breakfast," Harry said. "I want the full English. I'm starving." "You ate at 7. "I was nervous." "You didn't look nervous." "I was nervous for you." He held the door open. "Which is different. When I'm nervous for you I can't eat." She walked through the door. "I was fine." "I know. I was nervous anyway." He fell into step beside her as they walked up the long corridor toward the lifts, and his shoulder was warm against hers, the specific weight and warmth of someone who had been beside her since before she could walk in this body. "The estate documents thing," he said. When you said it, the whole room went quiet. Yes. Was that the plan? To make the room go quiet? The plan, she said, was to make every person in that room understand that they were sitting across from someone with information and the willingness to use it. The lift arrived. She stepped in. The quiet was a side effect. He stepped in beside her. The lift started up. Memos dove around them. He was smiling, not the full one, the smaller one, the one that meant something had landed somewhere real. "Next year," he said. "Next year," she agreed. "Harder than this year." "Probably. We'll handle it." She looked at the ministry atrium appearing above them as the lift rose, the gilded propaganda fountain and the busy officials and the architecture of an institution that had just found out it didn't have as firm a grip on the pieces it thought it had. She thought about Umbridge's tight smile and Malfoy's 1-second pause and Dumbledore's genuine apology sitting alongside his genuine calculations. She thought about McGonagall's voice in an empty office, the most reasonable thing a student has said to me in 30 years. She thought about the Thunderbird wand in her pocket, warm against her hip, which had no doubt about her whatsoever. "We'll handle it," she said. The lift reached the atrium. They walked out into the middle of it, past the fountain and the memos and the officials who looked up when they passed with the specific look of people who had gotten a memo of a different kind this morning. She walked through all of it with her wand in her hand and Harry's shoulder at her arm and the absolute, unqualified certainty of someone who has been a weapon, been a ghost, been a child in a cupboard, and has decided, clearly, finally, entirely on her own terms, what she is now. The flue was at the far end of the atrium. They walked toward it. Behind them, the fountain's gilded figures held their adoring poses and the ministry turned on its axis and somewhere in the upper floors Umbridge made a note in pink ink on a clipboard that smelled of cheap perfume and older intentions. And the morning light came through the high windows of the ministry atrium and caught the green of Harry's eyes and the black of her robes and the bright particular gleam of a wand that had been returned twice before and would not be returned again. They stepped into the fire. Chapter 6, Fire and Lightning, Blood and Magic. The letter from Lucius Malfoy arrived 9 days after the hearing. Not to Privet Drive, to Gringotts, routed through the estate account, which told her he'd done his research and understood that the front door wasn't the door to use with her. The letter was polite in the way that sharp things are polite when they want something. He wrote that he found her arguments at the hearing compelling, that he had concerns about the current direction of the ministry's relationship with the next generation of significant magical talent, and that he would be interested in a conversation at her earliest convenience. She read it twice. She turned it over and read the back, which was blank. She held it up to the light, looking for enchantments, and found a faint contact charm on the seal, nothing aggressive, just a read receipt, the magical equivalent of a tracking pixel, confirming that the letter had been opened by its intended recipient. She wrote back 3 days later. "Thank you for your letter. I'll be in touch." No commitment. No warmth. No information. She countered the read receipt with a simple negation charm she developed in the 4th floor room and sent it via a Gringotts courier rather than Hedwig, which closed the channel on her terms. She told Harry that evening. He was in the garden at Privet Drive, which Petunia had asked them to weed and which Harry had been doing with the meditative focus he brought to physical tasks. He liked work that had visible results, that turned into something you could point to. She came out and sat on the back step and told him about the letter and the response and watched his face cycle through the range she expected. "He's recruiting you," Harry said. "He's exploring whether I can be recruited," she said. "There's a difference. He doesn't know enough about me yet to recruit me. He's gathering data." "And your response?" "Told him nothing. Kept the door open." She looked at the garden, the very ordinary English summer afternoon of it. "Malfoy is useful if managed correctly. He's connected to every Death Eater family, every ministry faction, every old money network in the wizarding world. The information that moves through those networks is, Azza. Harry had stopped reading. He was looking at her. You're not going to work with Lucius Malfoy. I'm not working with him, she said. I'm keeping him in a position where he thinks he might eventually persuade me. That's different. Is it? She looked at him. Harry's jaw was doing the tight thing, but it was different from the one at the hearing. This wasn't anger at an external situation, this was the particular friction that happened between them when he disagreed with her method and was trying to work out whether he was right to. She respected that he did this. She respected that he didn't just capitulate. He's going to move pieces against us regardless, she said. The question is whether he moves them blind or whether he moves them thinking he has an angle. I prefer the latter because it's predictable. She met his gaze. I won't let it go past what I can control. If it gets there, I'll close it. Harry looked at her for another moment. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at the garden. Tell me when it moves, he said. Any of it. All of it. Always, she said. They sat in the ordinary afternoon for a while, Harry pulling weeds and Azula reading the properties of magic in its 8th read because it revealed new things each time and she found it genuinely remarkable, and Petunia brought out 2 glasses of lemonade without being asked and went back inside, and none of them acknowledged it, which was somehow better than acknowledging it. Second year started on a Tuesday and the quality of it was different from the first year in the way that all sequels are different, not in structure, but in what you bring to it. She boarded the train knowing the castle, knowing the people, knowing the shape of the game well enough to see the next moves from the current position. What she didn't know yet was what those moves were. Draco found her compartment before the train had cleared London. He came in without knocking, which she'd expected, and sat across from her with the ease of someone who has decided that social formality between them is a waste of both their times. His summer had been visible on him, something had shifted, some weight had been added, and she clocked it in the way he held his shoulders and the fact that his first words were not the performed version of Draco Malfoy but something closer to the actual one. My father wrote to you, he said. He did. What did you say back? Very little. She looked at him. Does it matter? It matters to me, he said, with a directness that was the most genuinely unguarded she'd seen from him. I'd like to know if you're going to be in my father's pocket, because it would significantly change my read on several things. She looked at him for a moment. The thing she'd identified in Madame Malkin's, the intelligence running hard underneath the performance, the genuine curiosity that appeared when he stopped managing, was clearer now. Whatever his summer had contained, it had done some stripping back. I'm not in anyone's pocket, she said. I don't fit in pockets. He almost smiled. No. I don't suppose you do. He looked out the window. He's planning something. I don't know the details, I'm not told the details, but I know the quality of his planning and this summer had a particular quality to it. A pause. I thought you should know. She processed this. He was giving her information without being asked. Voluntarily. Without a clear extraction of benefit. Why? She said. He looked back at her. The gray eyes were doing their work, she watched him making a decision and watched him arrive at the honest version of it rather than the strategic one. Because I've spent a year watching you operate and you're the only person at that school who sees the whole board and I'd like to be on the side of the person who sees the whole board. A beat. Also my father is often wrong and I am beginning to find that fact irritating. She held his gaze. She looked for the angle and found something more interesting instead, a person who was not yet who he was going to be and had just, consciously or not, started choosing which direction to grow. Tell me what you know, she said. When you know more. He nodded. One sharp dip of his head. Done. They didn't shake hands. They didn't formalize it. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was the kind of thing that would be visible only in retrospect, in the shape of what they did with it. Hermione arrived 12 minutes later, slightly out of breath, her hair already at summer maximized volume, and she stopped in the compartment door and looked at Draco Malfoy and then at Azula with an expression that was a very concentrated version of "explain this immediately." "Hermione," Azula said. "Sit down." Hermione sat. She did not take her eyes off Draco. He did not look at her with his usual particular blend of condescension and social classification, which was noted. "This is fine," Azula told her. "This," Hermione said carefully, "is Draco Malfoy. I'm aware. Who called me a know-it-all on the train last year and told Harry that some wizarding families were simply better than I was performing," Draco said. He said it without apology but also without the sneer the words would have carried 12 months ago. "It's what I was doing. I'm not currently performing." Hermione looked at him. She was running her own assessment, quickly, thoroughly, with the particular speed of a brain that had been processing information ahead of its peers since she could read. "You have a reason for being in this compartment," she said. "Several," he said. She looked at Azula. "Are they good reasons?" "Useful ones," Azula said. "Which I find more reliable than good." Hermione sat back. She was not fully satisfied. Hermione had strong feelings about Draco Malfoy and strong feelings were Hermione's whether, ever-present and occasionally severe, but she was willing to table it, which was its own kind of wisdom. She pulled out a book. Draco looked out the window. Azula went back to reading. The train moved north. Outside, England did its endlessly green thing. Somewhere behind them, Harry was in Ron's compartment being told something enthusiastically, which she could infer from the pattern of his silences in her awareness of him, the specific quality of Harry paying focused attention that she'd tuned to like a frequency. She was not worried. She was content. She was sitting in a moving train with someone who saw the whole board and someone who processed the world at full speed, and both of them had chosen to be in the same compartment as her. She found this, privately and without announcing it to anyone, remarkable. The year broke open in October. It broke open the way things do when something has been building underneath the surface long enough that it doesn't announce itself, it simply arrives, fully formed, having been inevitable for longer than you knew. She heard the voice on a Wednesday afternoon, walking back from the library, and felt Harry feel it 30 seconds before she rounded the corner and found him standing in the middle of a corridor looking at a wall with his head slightly tilted, the specific posture of someone hearing something no one else can hear. She knew what it was before she'd finished thinking about it. She'd read enough, followed enough threads through the restricted section, thought enough about the things that could inhabit walls and pipes and the ancient plumbing of a 1,000-year-old castle. A basilisk. A living one. In the walls. The Chamber of Secrets was real. She stood next to Harry and listened to the silence where the voice had been and ran the analysis at speed. A Parselmouth was directing it, which meant someone in the school had that ability or something in the school was creating the conditions for the ability to operate, which meant the diary or the object or the artifact that Lucius Malfoy had been planning through his quality summer was already in play. "You heard it," Harry said. "It wasn't a question." "I felt you hear it," she said. "Tell me what it said." He told her. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she stood in the corridor and built the structure of it, the timing, the angle, the fact that Draco had told her in September that something was moving in his father's circle and she had been watching for the ripple, and here it was, arriving not through the expected channel but through a child, through someone inside the school. "Ginny Weasley," she said. Harry looked at her sharply. "She's 12. She's being used," she said. "The diary. She found something, and whatever she found, it found her first." She'd seen Ginny on the train, first year, anxious and hopeful and already a little lost in the shadow of 5 older brothers and a house full of identity that had been claimed before she arrived. The exact shape of a person that a clever, patient old magic would look at and see an opening. "We need the diary. She won't give it to us. She doesn't know she has it. Not really. Not in the way that would let her make the choice to give it up." She started walking. "We need to find what it is and destroy it before it finishes what it's doing to her." Harry walked beside her. "How do we find it?" Draco knows more than he's told me, she said. Not because he's hiding it, because his father hid it from him. But he knows the shape of his father's plans well enough to give us the outline if we ask correctly. And then? And then we go to the chamber. It's a basilisk, Harry. She looked at him. I'm not afraid of a snake. He held her gaze. He made the calculation he always made, weighing the argument against the evidence of what she actually was, the long record of her being right and also being here, and she watched him arrive at the same place he always arrived. Together, he said. Obviously. She found Draco in the Slytherin common room that evening and she sat across from him at one of the stone tables and she said, without preamble, the diary. Tell me what you know. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, the recognition that the thing he hadn't been certain about had resolved into something visible. It's already in play, he said. Not a question. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he told her. He told her everything he knew, which was the outline of a plan his father had thought was elegant and which, hearing it described by Draco with the specific flatness of someone who has just understood that their family's plans have been used to harm a child, was revealed as what it actually was, the act of a man who had weaponized a 12-year-old girl to destroy a school he resented and discredit a headmaster he feared. When Draco finished speaking he looked at the table. Your father put a piece of Voldemort's soul into the hands of a first-year girl, she said. I know. He did it through you, indirectly. Through your school supplies. I know. His voice was flat. Not defensive. The flatness of someone who has just swallowed something very bitter and is holding it without spitting it back up. Ginny Weasley took it from my second-hand equipment at Madame Malkin's. He put it there. I didn't know. He stopped. Started again. I didn't know. She looked at him. She was not going to tell him it wasn't his fault, because that was a thing to say that made the person saying it feel better and the person receiving it feel worse, and she had no patience for it. She was also not going to hold him responsible for what his father had done through him. She made these calculations in 2 seconds and arrived at what was actually useful. Tell me everything your father said about the chamber, she said. Every detail. The entrance, the route, the nature of the guardian. He told her. She memorized it. They went on a Thursday. Not sneaking. She had decided, some years ago in a previous life, that sneaking communicated more anxiety than it prevented discovery, and she'd carried the principle across. She walked through the corridor that led to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom at 9:30 in the evening with Harry beside her and her wand in her hand, and when they passed Professor McGonagall coming from the opposite direction, she stopped. McGonagall looked at them. Her eyes went to the wands, both out, which told a story, and then to their faces, and then to the specific direction they'd been walking. Miss Potter, she said. Professor, she said. We've found the chamber. We're going in. The source is a basilisk controlled by a fragment of Voldemort's soul embedded in a diary that's currently possessing a first-year student. She watched McGonagall process this. We'd appreciate it if you could locate Ginny Weasley and make sure she's somewhere supervised. She'll need help when this is over. McGonagall was silent for 4 seconds. For complete seconds, which was approximately 3.5 more than most things, gave Minerva McGonagall pause. You are 12 years old, she said. Almost 13, Harry offered. McGonagall looked at him. Looked at Azula. Looked at the direction they were going. Azula could see her making it, the decision that was not the comfortable one or the procedurally correct one but the one that was right, the kind of decision that required a person to trust their own eyes over their institutional instincts. Come back, she said. Her voice was clipped and precise, and underneath it, the thing Azula had come to know was always underneath McGonagall's precision, absolute, uncompromising care. Come back in one piece. Both of you. We intend to, Azula said. McGonagall moved. She was already pulling out her wand and going in the opposite direction, which was everything they needed her to do. They went in. The chamber was a long time to reach and she mapped it as they went. The layout Draco had given her matching the reality, the plumbing system of Hogwarts converted over centuries into the backbone of something old and deliberate and wrong in the way that things are wrong when they've been built to serve a specific cruelty. She didn't speak much. Harry didn't either. They moved the way they'd been moving in the fourth-floor room for over a year, in the comfortable, efficient sync of people who have trained together long enough that they don't need to narrate. She heard the basilisk before they found the chamber. Felt it, more accurately, the mass of it moving through the walls, the size of something that had been alive for 1,000 years and had the deep, patient stillness of an old predator. She'd dealt with creatures before. She'd never dealt with something at this scale and she was honest with herself about that, acknowledged it, moved through it. The chamber itself was cathedral vast and cold and smelled of standing water and stone and the particular deep rot of something that had been sealed for 50 years and hadn't improved for the closure. She felt Harry feel it too, the shift in him, the specific way his magic activated when he was present to something real, urgent, actual. Ginny was at the far end. Still. Too still. Not dead, she could see the small motion of breathing, but somewhere between herself and the thing that had been eating its way into her all year, a terrible in-between. The diary was beside her. Open. The memory shade of Tom Riddle was standing over it, and it turned when they entered the chamber with the slow, satisfied motion of something that has been waiting. The shade was beautiful in the way she recognized, not her previous self's beauty, not the calculated projection of perfection her father had cultivated in her, but something older and more deliberate and far more dishonest. It was the beauty of a person who had understood early that their appearance was a door and had never stopped opening it for their own advantage. It looked at Harry first. Then at her. 2 Potters, it said, in a voice like an echo of a voice, present but hollow, the copy of something that had once been real. How unexpected. Its eyes stayed on her. Or perhaps not. I've been watching Ginny's memories. You've been a considerable inconvenience this year. I do try, she said. You're not afraid, it said, with what would have been admiration in a person who was capable of feeling it. I've met your older self, she said. The version you become. I wasn't impressed then either. The shade went very still. This was, she could see it recalibrating, the young Tom Riddle who didn't know yet what he would become, processing the information that this girl had encountered the grown version and found it inadequate. She watched something go through it that was almost insecurity, which was interesting to see in a memory given corporeal form by stolen life. How? She raised her wand. The first spell was concussive, not designed to harm the shade, which was memory and stolen energy and couldn't be harmed by conventional means, but to disrupt the connection between the diary and Ginny, the thread of life that was still flowing from the girl to the page. She hit it precisely, the thread not the participants, and felt it fray. The shade staggered. The basilisk, it said, and she felt the massive presence in the walls respond to that word, felt the creature begin to move. Harry, she said. Eyes closed. Don't open them until I say. He closed his eyes. He trusted her completely and she intended to be worth that trust. The basilisk came through the wall. It was enormous. 1,000 years of growing in the dark, the largest living serpent in Britain, its scales the grey-green of deep water and its body moving with the fluid, terrible ease of something at the top of every hierarchy it had ever encountered. It entered the chamber the way water enters a low place, filling it, claiming the space. She didn't look at its eyes. She looked at its body, its position, the angle and the movement, the physics of it, because she'd spent a lifetime learning to fight things that were larger than her and the lesson was always the same, size is a resource but it is also a limitation, and the limitation is always that large things cannot be everywhere at once. She was already moving. She went left, not back, which is what it expected, it tracked her by heat and sound and she could feel the tracking, the enormous cold intelligence of a creature that had survived a millennium by being exactly what it was, and she let it commit to following her left before she cut right and came around its back quarter at speed and drove her wand into the junction where the scales thinned behind the first segment of its jaw. The spell she used was not in the curriculum. It was not in any book she'd found at Hogwarts. It was something she'd built in the fourth-floor room over 2 years, the synthesis of kinetic magical transference and directed elemental force and the particular conviction that had been hers across 2 lifetimes, the absolute iron certainty that the thing she directed would go, and it went. The basilisk seized. The seizure ran through the full length of it, 1,000 years of muscle gone suddenly uncertain. She backed off. She moved to its side, where the eyeline couldn't catch her. "Now," she said to Harry. Harry's eyes were still closed. He raised his wand and he didn't use what she'd used, he used something entirely his own, something she'd watched develop over 2 years of evening practice, the emotional directness of his magic that went straight from feeling to outcome without the mediating step of technique. He threw fire. Not her fire. Harry's fire was different from what she pulled, hers was precise and narrow and always exactly the temperature she intended. His was huge and comprehensive and absolutely committed, the magic of someone who is completely present to what they're doing and has removed the last hesitation between themselves and the thing they want. The basilisk, already seized, met Harry's fire and the chamber lit up like noon. She watched through the sound and the heat and the impossible brightness of it, and she added what she had to what he had, her precision to his power, and for the space of 30 seconds the Chamber of Secrets was the most genuinely terrifying place she'd been in either of her lives. The basilisk stilled. The echo of it moved through the chamber's water and stone for a long time after. She stood in the afterward and did her internal check, whole, intact, the slightly electric feeling that followed sustained magical output. She looked at Harry, whole, intact, his hair worse than ever, his eyes bright with the particular aliveness he had after something real had been demanded of him. She looked at the shade of Tom Riddle. It was smaller. The chamber's light had taken something from it, the ambient energy, the spare life it had been borrowing from Ginny, which was no longer flowing. It was still present, but diminished, and it looked at her with the young Voldemort's eyes, which were dark and clever and currently recalculating every assumption they'd made. "You can't destroy me," it said. "I'm a memory." She walked to the diary. She picked it up. She felt the Horcrux in it, the piece of fragmented soul embedded in the pages, which had a specific and deeply unpleasant feeling, the feeling of something that was not supposed to be here, that was alive in the technical sense and nothing more. She turned to Harry. "The basilisk fawn," she said. He was already moving. He found one, enormous, curved, impossibly sharp, and brought it to her without asking for context because he trusted her enough not to need it. She looked at the diary. She looked at the shade of Tom Riddle, which had gone very still. "This is what you become," she said to it. A fragment of a man who was so afraid of death that he dismantled himself trying to avoid it. This is the thing you made when you chose the kind of power that requires you to give up everything it was supposed to protect. She looked at the page. It's a small life, in the end. I've had smaller. It doesn't recommend itself. She drove the Fong through the diary. The shade tore. Not like something breaking, like something releasing, the sound of a thing that has been held in an unnatural shape for too long finally let go of the pretense of its own structure. It came apart in a scream that had no sound and filled the chamber entirely, and then it was gone and the air was ordinary and the diary was smoking in her hands. The chamber was quiet. At the far end, Ginny Weasley made a sound, small and confused and alive, and started moving. They brought Ginny out. Azula walked ahead and Harry walked beside Ginny, who was shaking and mostly silent and holding Harry's arm with both hands in the way of someone who is still establishing whether their own body belongs to them again. Harry talked to her, quietly, constantly, the particular low-level warmth of his voice that she'd observed worked on most people the way a steady light works in a dark room. By the time they reached the corridor outside Myrtle's bathroom, Ginny was on her own feet and crying in a way that was entirely normal rather than frightening. McGonagall was waiting with Molly and Arthur Weasley, who had been contacted and arrived from the ministry in 20 minutes with the speed of 2 parents who had received the information that their daughter was in a chamber somewhere in Hogwarts. Arthur Weasley had a look on his face that she'd seen once before, on Hagrid, looking at the cupboard under the stairs, the look of someone understanding that a child had been in danger and understanding it fully, with all of themselves. Molly Weasley took Ginny. The sound she made when she did was something Azula looked away from, because some things were not her territory and she knew which ones they were. McGonagall was looking at them. At the diary, destroyed in Azula's hand. At the condition of their robes and the quality of the energy around them both, the specific static aftermath of serious magic. The basilisk is dead, Azula told her. The diary has been destroyed. Ginny was still alive when we found her. She'll need to see a healer. There may be residual effects from the extended exposure, I'm not certain of the exact mechanism. McGonagall looked at her for a long time. She was doing the thing she sometimes did, the thing that was behind the precision, the thing that lived in the same place as the care. Are you hurt? She said. No. McGonagall looked at Harry. Mr. Potter. Fine, Harry said. We're both fine. McGonagall looked at the diary. Then at Azula. Her expression moved through something that she managed and contained, and she said, briskly, because brisk was her vehicle for the things she couldn't say plainly, 10 points to Gryffindor. 50 points to Slytherin. A pause. We'll discuss the rest in my office. Both of you. Tomorrow morning. She walked away. She stopped once, her back to them, and there was a moment where her shoulders did something that Azula understood from the specific quality of it, the management of an emotion that had arrived without permission, being returned to its compartment. Then she walked on. Arthur Weasley shook Harry's hand with both of his and shook Azula's hand with both of his and said, "Thank you," with the specific weight of a father talking to the people who brought his daughter back, and she accepted it without deflecting, which was something she was still practicing and was getting marginally better at. She and Harry walked back toward their separate towers, and at the junction where the staircases diverged they stopped. "Tomorrow," Harry said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. He stood there for a moment. "You knew the whole time. About the diary. About Ginny. I suspected from October. I confirmed it in December. And you waited. Until I had enough," she said. "Yes." He looked at her with those green eyes in the dim corridor light, the castle breathing around them in the way old things breathe, slowly, without urgency, having already survived everything. "You always wait until you have enough," he said. "And you always have enough before anyone else thinks you should." She said nothing. "I just want you to know," he said, "that I'm not behind you. I'm not following you. I'm with you. That's different." She looked at him. The thing she kept in the filing system labeled "deal with later" was open, she could feel it open, the way it was sometimes when she'd done something that made the careful management of herself briefly insufficient to the moment. She looked at him and she let him see what she usually managed, the thing underneath the precision and the strategy and the 2 lifetimes of learning to be a weapon, the thing that was simply her, which was smaller and less armored than anything she showed the world. "I know," she said. "I know you're with me." He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He reached out and straightened her collar, the quick, practical gesture of someone who has noticed a thing out of place, exactly the way she'd straightened his tie on the train the first day. He stepped back. He went up his stairs. She watched him go. She went down to her dungeon. Dumbledore called them to his office 3 days later. The office was exactly what she'd expected and also more than she'd expected, a magnificent circular room full of the accumulated evidence of a very long, very active life, portraits of sleeping headmasters on every wall, instruments of silver spinning on every surface. A phoenix on a perch. Fawkes, who looked at her when she came in with the clear-eyed intelligence of something that had been paying attention for longer than she'd been alive in either incarnation. The phoenix and she looked at each other. Then Fawkes made a sound, low, melodic, not the full song but an acknowledgement, and looked away. She sat across from Dumbledore. Harry sat beside her. "I owe you both a more significant apology than the one I gave at the Ministry," Dumbledore said, without preamble. He was looking at them both, but primarily at her, and his blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses had the quality she'd been learning to read, not the comfortable certainty, but the genuine reckoning of a man who has found the edge of where his certainty holds. I placed an object of immense danger within this school. I underestimated the vector by which it arrived and the speed of its effect. A child was harmed. She'll recover, Harry said. Because of you. Dumbledore looked at Harry, then at Azalea. Both of you. And I find that I must acknowledge something I have been, reluctant, perhaps, to acknowledge directly. He folded his hands on his desk. I have been treating you as pieces in a longer game. As resources to be prepared and directed toward an outcome I have determined. I have done this because I believe, genuinely, that the outcome I'm working toward is the right one. A pause. But I have been insufficiently honest about the cost of that approach, and you have both paid parts of that cost without being told the price. She looked at him. She was looking for the layer under this, the strategy in the honesty, the move in the apology. She found it, because it was there, because Dumbledore was incapable of an action that was purely simple. But she also found, underneath the strategy, something that had no strategic function, an old man who had loved James and Lily Potter and was looking at their children and finding that his calculations had been inadequate to the reality of what he'd arranged. Both things were true. She held both. What is the outcome you're working toward? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Harry must ultimately face Voldemort, he said. And he must face him in a specific way, at a specific time, for the outcome to be what I believe it needs to be. He looked at Harry. The nature of the night your parents died created a connection between you and Voldemort that has implications I have been navigating carefully for 11 years. The full details, you're not ready to tell us yet, she said. I'm not ready to tell you yet, he confirmed. I will be. I intend to be. A pause. I am telling you this much because I believe you deserve to know that there is more, and that the more is significant, and that withholding it has been a choice I've made and not an oversight. She sat with this. Harry was very still beside her. Voldemort put pieces of himself in objects, she said. The diary was one of them. Dumbledore's eyes moved to her. Held there. Very still. Yes, he said, carefully. Yes, it was. There are others. A long pause. Yes. How many? The pause was longer. She watched him run the calculation of how much to give her, and she watched him arrive at the place where his long-game certainty ran against the evidence of two children sitting across from him who had just destroyed a piece of Voldemort's soul in a chamber under his school without his assistance and without getting themselves killed. I believe 6, he said. Including the diary. Perhaps more. I am still establishing the full picture. She looked at the desk. She built the shape of it, 6 fragments of a soul, 6 objects, 6 locations unknown, a man who had dismantled himself in terror of death until there was barely enough of him left to die. She thought about the chamber and the shade's voice saying I'm a memory, and she thought about the Fong and the diary and the knowledge that this was not over, this was the beginning of the shape of the next several years. She looked at Dumbledore. When you're ready, she said, tell us everything. Not selected parts, not what you think we need for the next step. Everything. She held his gaze. We can handle it. Dumbledore looked at her. Behind those blue eyes she could see the long, complicated machinery of his conviction running against the evidence of the girl sitting across from him, and the evidence was winning. I believe you can, he said. The train home was in June, and she sat in a compartment with Harry and Hermione and Ron and Draco, who had arrived at the compartment door with the specific energy of someone who has made a decision and is committed to the awkwardness it requires, and Neville Longbottom, who had attached himself to the group around February and who she had found, over months, to be someone whose quality of courage was so understated and so genuine that she'd stopped understating what she thought of it. Outside the windows, Scotland gave way to England in the way it always did, the shift from serious landscape to manageable one. The compartment was loud with 6 people at the end of a year that had been considerable, the specific loud of people who have been through things together and are still processing. Ron was telling a story about something that had happened in potions. Harry was laughing. Hermione was correcting the technical details of the story and laughing at the same time. Draco was making observations from the window seat that were drier than they would have been a year ago and funnier for the dryness. Neville was eating a sandwich with the quiet happiness of someone who is exactly where they want to be. She was watching all of them. And she was aware, with the part of her that had always done the accounting, of what was in the room, not strategy, not resources, not variables in a calculation. People. Hers. People she had let in across 2 years and 2 lives with the cautious, methodical care of someone building something they intend to last. She thought about the 6 Horcruxes. She thought about what Dumbledore had said and what he hadn't said, and the shape of what was coming. She thought about Lucius Malfoy's letter and Umbridge's pink quill and the 50 members of the Wizengamot and all the careful, old, certain power that had looked at her and seen a problem to be managed. She thought about the chamber, and Harry's fire, and the diary coming apart. She thought about the Thunderbird wand warm in her pocket, which had never doubted her for a moment. She thought about Azula, the first one, the 16-year-old who had died in an asylum still burning, who had been made into a weapon and aimed at everything her father pointed her at and had never once been asked what she wanted the fire for. She knew what she wanted it for. She looked out the window. The English countryside was doing its endlessly reasonable thing, green and manageable and ordinary, and under it, braided through it, woven into every wall and corridor and vault and courtroom of the world that moved inside it, was a war that had been paused, not ended, and was gathering itself for its next attempt. Let it gather. She had 2 years of data, a network across 4 houses, a goblin bank's worth of documentation, a headmaster who was beginning to learn to tell her the truth, and a brother who was with her, not behind her, and knew the difference. She had a wand that responded to her will directly, almost without mediation. She had fire. Harry leaned over and said something quietly, something Ron had just done that he found funny, some small ordinary thing, and she turned from the window and listened, and when the punchline arrived she felt the laugh before she let it out, which was still new, which was still something she was allowing, and it came out real. Ron looked startled. Hermione looked delighted. Harry looked, simply, at her, with the specific warmth of someone who got exactly what they wanted from the thing they did. "There it is," he said, quietly enough that it was just for her. "There what is," she said. "Your laugh," he said. "I've been collecting them." She looked at him. "You're collecting evidence of my humanity." "Of your happiness," he corrected. "Different thing." She turned back to the window. She let the smile stay this time, instead of filing it. Outside, England moved past, ordinary and impossible, as it had always been, as it would be, and the train carried them south toward a summer that was the last ordinary one, toward the years that were coming with their battles and their costs and their terrible necessary choices, toward a war that would not end quietly or politely but would end. She had decided it would end. She had never once lost a war she'd decided to win. The fire was ready. The lightning was coming. What you protect says more about you than anything you were built to destroy.